Welcome to Midwest Paranormal Presents Paranormal Soup. I'm your host, Jason Bland, and tonight we have returning guest, one of my definitely favorite guests. I've been waiting for this guy to come back on the show for a while now, is Paul Anthony Wallis. You remember when we talked about his book, Escaping from Eden? This is my ancient aliens. Man, this is, one of my definitely favorite topic. And Paul is such a wonderful person to talk to. Well, he has a new book just coming out called The Scars of Eden. This is kind of like the follow-up to Escaping from Eden. We're going to be talking about Arcadians, Sumerians, biblical, all the stuff where I basically, in my opinion, is all aliens. Must be aliens, right? Yeah, I watch Twitch Ancient Aliens. Well, Paul is a lot smarter than Ancient Aliens, in my opinion. Ancient Aliens, I'm a big fan of the show, but they get stuff wrong. Paul is so knowledgeable. I mean, this stuff that the man's able to remember and talk about, I just sit back and listen. That's what you're going to do tonight, too. This is a very, very interesting topic, and some people might not agree with it, but you know what? Paul's a Christian. He still has his faith, but he's investigated the meanings behind the words. He's looked into all these different cultures, not just the Bible. We're going to talk about different religions that all tie into this. The stuff I've been preaching for years, but Paul says it way better. And if you want to call in and talk about it or share your thoughts on it, we will open up the phone lines later in the show. Hopefully we don't have as much problems. Paul should be joining us on the StreamYard call, so the phone line should be fully open, unlike last week where I had issues. Hopefully not this week. We've had a number of issues over the last few weeks. I don't know, Mercury in retrograde. I don't know. I don't pay attention to that stuff. But I don't know. We had some technical difficulties. Hopefully it's all back on the rails, not off the rails like it has been. And we're going to be good to go. So let's go ahead and get rolling into the show. Welcome to another night of Paranormal Soup. As I said before, I'm your host, Jason Bland. Tonight's guest, Paul Anthony Wallis, author of The Scars of Eden, will be joining us after our first commercial break, after the World Wide Web of Weird. I didn't even mention that in the intro like I usually do. Been off my game lately, huh? That's one reason here. I want to make sure we got Rob with us. Rob came early for the sound check, and I, for once, was late, and Rob was early. Sorry, Rob. So hopefully we can hear you. Are you there with us, Rob?
Yep, how about that?
Now I hear you. Okay, good. This is our sound check right here. Hi, people. Get to join sound check. That's my bad. I was actually running late this time. Watching a show on HBO with my wife. I had to see it. I'm sorry. Joining us from St. Augustine, Florida, Rob. We have Rob. He runs the World Wide Web of Weird. And then my beautiful co-host as well, Jamie D, is with us. How you doing tonight, Jamie?
Doing well, thank you. Glad that Rob made it in time.
Yep, I am. Last week, man. Last week, I literally had no memory left. I had to squeeze. I did squeeze memory out of my hard drive, like shook it and got some memory. So we're better tonight. But last week, I had no memory. If you hadn't showed up, World Wide Web Weird would have been canceled. So thank you, Rob, for always being here and showing up when you do. It's greatly appreciated. And Jamie, thank you both. I greatly appreciate both of you guys. I couldn't have done this for 5 years without you. So it's been great. It's been great, and we're going to keep doing it. And we got a great returning guest, Paul Anthony Wallis. We'll talk to him after the World Wide Web of Weird in our first commercial break. But speaking of that, we do have a lot of weird to get to, so let's roll into the World Wide Web of Weird. Tonight on the World Wide Web of Weird, I figured I always like to cover certain topics at the beginning of the World Wide Web of Weird that were continuing topics. I've been talking about Elon Musk and his, I want to cheer the man on at times, and other times I want to dude, you need to settle down. You're playing mad scientist. This is the settle down, you're playing mad scientist part. Elon Musk says his startup Neuralink has wired a monkey to play video games using its mind. Oh, yeah. For those listening on the Paranormal Soup Radio Network, we are a webcast. You can watch us on Facebook, YouTube, and, Rob, Weird Wednesday show, you saw you guys were doing Twitch, and me and Jamie were talking. We might try the Twitch thing. I don't know. It usually was for video gamers, but I guess more people are talking on there. I don't know. We might try it. I don't know. It sounded cool. I got to check out a little bit of last week's episode at the beginning. I had to go to bed. Missed it with Joyce. Thank you guys again for taking Joyce on this show, because it sucked. I got to make it up to you still, Joyce, though. We still got to get her on. All right. Well, first off, in the World Wide Web of Weird, Elon Musk says his startup Neuralink has wired up a monkey to play video games using its mind. I just remembered I got to do that. There we go. Okay. Then my tablet here is messing up. All right. So Tesla's... What'd you say?
No.
Right. No. Tesla's boss, Elon Musk, said in an interview late Sunday that a monkey has been wired up to play video games with its mind by the company he founded called Neuralink. Neuralink put a computer chip into the monkey's skull and used tiny wires to connect to its brain, Musk said. It's not an unhappy monkey, he said during a talk on Clubhouse, a new social media app gaining popularity that allows people to have informal voices chats while others listen in. You can't even see where the neural implant was put in, except that he's got a slight like dark mohawk. So the monkey's got a mohawk. Let me guess, he smokes too, because the monkey's got to smoke while he's playing video games. That's what I just picture in my mind. The billionaire, who also spoke about space travel colonies on Mars, crypto artificial intelligence, and COVID-19 vaccines, said Neuralink is trying to figure out if it can use its chip to get monkeys to play mind pong with each other. Mind pong? Just like use your mind. Pong. That would be pretty cool, said Musk, who is CEO of Neuralink in addition to SpaceX and Tesla. Headquartered in San Francisco, Neuralink's team around of 100 people is trying to develop an implantable computer brain interface. Musk describes it as a Fitbit in your skull. My wife had a Fitbit. She didn't use it very long. I had an Apple Watch, and it would do the whole thing. They got annoying. I put it away and never used it again. Why would I want it in my brain? Like, can you take this thing out? I'm tired of telling me I need to walk more. He said the aim of Neuralink is to increase the rate at which information can flow from the human brain to a machine. I'm all right with the speed it's at. AI is only going to get smarter, and Neuralink technology could one day allow humans to go along for the ride, according to Musk. To illustrate the pace of progress in AI, the innovator, who believes the machine intelligence will eventually surpass human intelligence. So you want to put it in our brain? Pointed to breakthroughs made at research labs like OpenAI, which he co-founded, and DeepMind, a London AI lab that was acquired by Google in 2014. Where's Sarah Connor, man? Right. Take him out. Take him out.
What I'm seeing here, if he's wanting them to play mind pong together, it's not just the mind playing a game. He wants them to communicate telepathically. They want them to play the game.
Use their mind to control the machine. Well, yeah. After I don't have the article for this, but just after I saw this article, an article came out how they're ready to start testing on humans as early as late 2021. They put the chip in the monkey. The next thing's us. We're the monkey level 2.
For the monkey.
Yeah. So how many people are going to get the chip in your brain?
Yeah, not.
I love video games. I love my VR headset I just got recently. I thought it broke and fixed it. But, I love video games. I do love technology. I got a little mad scientist in me, too, that does love some of this stuff. But at the same time, I've seen enough to know that bad idea. Like, I don't care how cool it is to put a chip in your brain and, like, next thing you know, you're, like, in the Matrix and can do some cool, like, dodge bullets. And, no chip in my brain.
Up like the Chinese military.
Or just control your everyday thoughts. Like, I'm mad, I'm angry. Oh, I feel all right.
Yeah.
Take away my freedom. I'm good.
The monkey's going to be smoking, playing video games. Next thing you know, he's going to steal the car to go to the liquor store. He's going to be out partying in Vegas. And, it's just going to go downhill from there.
Yeah, video games, that's the first path. Satan.
It's a gateway.
Okay. Some scientists are up to different things. This one, in Article 2 here, Rob. Scientists create spinach that can send you emails. Yeah, you heard that right. A recent experiment produced spinach plants capable of sending information over a network. The unorthodox experiment concerns a relatively niche area of technology. There is a niche technology, I guess, for this. Research known as plant nanobionics, which combines nanotechnology with plant biology to achieve new things. So, what was that? What did I think of? Where the plants try to kill you? Neon Flux. Remember that? There was an anime in the name of the movie. Yeah, that sounds kind of like what they tried to do. All right, I know, it's just a movie. The study, which was carried out by scientists at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, had initially focused on finding a way to use plants to detect explosives, but later involved using them to learn about the environment and to relay the information back to a mobile phone. So now if you get a chip in your brain, your plants can talk to you too.
Dude, that's too many voices in my head, man. I already got
Feed me, Seymour. Feed me. No. Here we demonstrate the living spinach plants can be engineered to serve as a self-powered pre-concentrators and auto-samplers, I don't know what any of this means, of analytes and ambient groundwater as infrared communication platforms that can send information. If the sentence becomes that long, it's just, you know what? It's probably just a better idea just to put that away.
Yeah.
I don't know. Obviously, we're not talking about having spinach plants type out an email in a conventional sense. Instead, the fusion of biology and nanotechnology has enabled the sensory data from the spinach to be communicated in a way that can be picked up and analyzed by human scientists. Plants are very good analytical chemists, said the study lead author, Professor Michael Storano. They have an extensive root network in the soil and constantly sampling groundwater and have a way to self-power and transport the water up into leaves. I mean, yeah, we wait for your plants to tell you, I need water. Seymour. That's
why do all the sci-fi techs? Why does everybody got to play God? Why can't they, work on stuff like cleaning?
Figure it's time to water the plants. You don't need to send you an email.
Yeah. There's a lot of
good chip in your brain.
Yeah, there's a lot of good things they could work on, but they just avoid those and go right.
I mean, they could be good things. We could be being overcritical. I'm willing to admit that. I mean, technology has saved lives. Technology is making us do this show.
That's true.
I'm not all like, it's Satan. Okay, let's move on.
Next special.
Speaking of Elon Musk, now we got the first ever entirely civilian space trip planned. A U.S. billionaire has funded a private manned space mission that will include 3 members of the public. Every manned spaceflight to this day has involved at least one major space agency, but later this year, this could be all set to change with the announcement of the first ever entirely commercial space trip. Funded by U.S. billionaire Jared Eichmann, the mission will see 4 passengers blast off aboard SpaceX Dragon for an undetermined number of days spent in space. But particularly interesting is who Eichmann has chosen to take along. 3 members of the public with no astronaut experience whatsoever. 2 have already been decided. One is a healthcare worker at St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital, while the other is a businessman involved in credit card processing company. So, like he calls and says, "Excuse me, you've been late with your bill." Now he's going to be an astronaut. What the heck, man? The final seat's still up for grabs. Hey. And we'll have to wait to find out who it was. If you're just picking anybody, I mean, come on.
Well, after that last rocket exploded when it came back to land.
Wait a second. Maybe not. Okay. I'll pass. I have a family. If I didn't have a family, though, if I didn't have kids and a wife I love very dearly and never want to be separated from, I would totally do it. That blew up. I'd like, I'm cool. I'll give it a shot. I would. You send anybody up, I'm going for it. If I'm going out, I'm going out that way. Because either I'm getting off this planet away from all you crazy people, because you guys are going to end up destroying yourselves, or I'm going to blow up in space. That's cool. But, I got a family. I'm not going to do that. Okay. All right, let's move on. All right, we're running out of time here. All right, yeah, I'm just off my game, man. Wow. Okay. This one's cool because I'm from Indiana. Cops spot UFO cluster, and I love it when police do. We'll play the video in a second. A pair of cops in Indiana were left scratching their heads earlier this week when they spotted a puzzling cluster of lights hovering in the night sky. According to a local media report, the perplexing sighting occurred on Monday evening in the city of Evansville as Officer Trendon Demichi and his partner were out on patrol. They stopped at an intersection. The duo noticed an odd series of lights in the sky, which seemed to form a line. Demichi, am I saying that right, managed to capture the scene on the video using his cell phone, and the footage was subsequently shared by Evansville Police Department, who told residents that our officers may have found something out of this world tonight. Don't worry, though. We'll be keeping an eye out for the little green creatures tonight. They always got to make some just comment. Okay, go ahead and play the video, though.
What are those lights?
Now,
What
Jamie,
are
you've seen the
those,
Starlink
man?
stuff.
They gotta
Looks
be
like they're staying in place.
Do you think this could be that?
drones. Why are they in a line?
There's like 10 of them.
At least it's Kentucky. What are those?
It's not in Kentucky. He's on the street on Kentucky.
That's
It's a Kentucky street.
Well,
It's in Indiana.
what are those lights? What are those, man? They gotta
Looks
be.
like they're staying in place.
I mean, they're pretty
They gotta
dang
be
still for whatever it is.
Why are they in a line?
There's like 10 of them.
At least it's Kentucky. What are those?
Or it's not far from. That's right. It's not. You're just by Evansville's, just by the Kentucky border. That's
Yeah.
right. I just read what street it was on. It wasn't Kentucky Street. That's why he said that.
It's Christmas light.
And this article goes on to think it's either.
I see
yeah.
it. I see it now on my big screen. It does look like a train of lights.
Like the Starlink.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I wonder. I mean, he's putting a bunch of these up there. It's crazy. That's
So
Starlink.
whatever
That's crazy,
day
though.
that was, we need to see if there was a launch that same day.
I don't think there was. I don't think there was a launch. Let me go back. Where was that? Hold on.
What
Did that go
are
Let me
full
look it up. Where was it? Because it was. When did they say this happened? Darn it! I don't have the date on here. I'll have to look into that. But if I remember right, I don't think there was a launch. That's what they're saying in one of the articles. I have this Coast to Coast article. I'll have to look into that. But it's interesting. If that's, I mean, wow.
What are those?
That looks way up there. And I know it's not, it's either Starlink or it's something else. Because drones, I don't think would, it'd be some coordination to keep them that still
I
up
don't
in the air.
think they're drones.
That high up. Yeah.
And they're not.
They're definitely not lanterns.
or
No way.
balloons, No.
It's too well formed and still. So Starlink's my only guess. All right. But right over in Indiana, of course, way far from me. I'm at the way other end of Indiana. Okay, let's move on. We got another one here. This is just a picture. String of lights photographed near Charlotte, North Carolina. The lights, which appeared recently over the state's Indian Trail community to the southeast of Charlotte, were photographed by Alyssa Homewood, who posted the images up on Facebook. Anybody know what these lights were tonight? She asked. No sounds at all. They just flickered like lanterns. Very right, similar to what we were seeing in Indiana, but followed the same exact path until they disappeared, which was odd. My initial thought was, when I saw the lights, was it some kind of helicopters in the distance? But as the lights got closer, there was no sound, and they went straight up in the sky. So that's different. These things actually moved for her. I couldn't see anything around the light, but all she got was a picture. I mean, come on, we got cell phones with video. I couldn't see anything around the lights. It's just they were not lanterns, but the lights flickered like you imagine a lantern would look. So it could be lanterns. Compounding the mystery was the fact that a cluster of 3 additional lights surrounded by a blue glow had shown up in the photograph, despite not being seen at the time. So this they didn't even see that. That could be some kind of light reflection. In the sky, it did not look blue. It looked like a ground of bright lights. I thought it was odd, though, that a few people have seen and photographed the same bluish group of lights. Indeed, several people on Facebook came forward after seeing her photograph to claim that they had also seen the same thing, sparking considerable debate over what the explanation could be. I don't know. I mean, if that's inside a car, that could be a reflection inside the car, like off the window. Yeah. I don't know. I'd have to have more information on how she took the photo. I'm always suspect if they're like, well, I didn't see it, but it came up in the picture. But she was seeing UFO or some kind of anomalous activity in the sky at the time. All right, we'll move on. We got to move on. All right, from BBC.com. It's not paranormal, but I find these stories odd. And this one's from Japan. A Japanese woman kept mother's body in freezer for 10 years. Yami Yoshino, 48, said that she found her mother dead and hid the body 10 years ago because she didn't want to move out of the Tokyo home they shared, local media reported. There were no visible wounds on the frozen body, police said. The authorities could not determine the time and cause of the woman's death. The body was reportedly discovered by a cleaner after Miss Yoshino, or Shono, had been forced to leave the apartment due to missing rent payments. The body had been fit to the freezer, police said. Miss Yoshino was arrested in the hotel city of Shibuya, near Tokyo, on Friday. You know, there's people that do this. They literally live with a loved one. I've heard this, you know, even in Japan they do this. Live with a loved one. The loved one has the name of the lease or owns the property. They die. They collect their, here they do it, they collect their Social Security checks, and they keep the body in the freezer. How many of those people voted?
Yeah.
I'm just saying. But yeah, she totally, you know, this is, oh, mom died, I don't want to move out, I'm going to put you in the freezer just to keep you close, Norman Bates style.
Yeah, I'm going to pass on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, man, Japan, you know, I think rent's really high in Japan. Trying to get a good spot, yeah, it's worth keeping a body in the freezer. Imagine pulling that off for 10 years, though. 10 years.
That's a long, I wonder if it was had freezer burn on it.
Robert.
Oh, yeah. All right, this one is to leave you on a good note because I play the free lotto, like PCH lotto and stuff, and I used to play the lotto, like, you know, give $1 here, and I would like try to like do remote viewing the lotto. Well, this I find really interesting. So, and I've gotten some numbers in dreams before. This woman dream yields women's winning lottery numbers. Deciding on which numbers to pick, and this is from unexplainedmysteries.com, when buying a lottery ticket can be frustrating. But for a long-term lottery player and a Toronto resident, Dang Pravafadum, there's never been a concern. Rather than struggling to come up with the numbers, she had been using ones that came to her husband in a dream 20 years ago and has played the lottery with him ever since. Now at least her perseverance has paid off big time. I went back to pay some bills, and my husband went to check the tickets, she said. When we got in the car, he told me we won $60 million jackpot.
That would come in handy.
He wasn't serious, not joking. You know, see, this is the me my wife talked about, because I knew somebody had a wife. Now, not that much money she joked about, but she joked about like $850,000. Total coworker of mine. His wife calls up the store and tells him that, oh, we won $850,000. He was like, I quit. You know, I was like me and my wife know we would never pull that joke on each other.
Yeah.
Like, we would never do that. If I said we won $60 million, damn well my wife know right that moment we did. Because I would never joke about that. Anyways, so I knew he was telling the truth. I started to cry. I've always prayed for a blessing that my family would be taken care of due to the pandemic. I was laid off last spring, so the money would certainly help make our lives much easier. Precognitive dreams have been around for as long as human civilization. However, it remains unclear whether or not such experiences are due to coincidence or if we really can see the future events. According to a 2013 study by the University of Edinburgh's Department of Psychology, as many as 1 in 3 people claim to have precognitive experiences at some point in their lives. I've had clear as day precognitive. Why can't I have a precognitive dream about give me the dang lotto numbers? You know, I've had. I mean, you can ask my wife. I've called stuff. I've had dreams where it's exact detail. Give me some numbers. You know, thing is, she got these 20 years ago and kept playing them. So skeptics are going to be like, well, you know, it's the odds. She played them. Okay, $60 million jackpot. Let's say they had 8 numbers. I don't know Canada's lotto. I know I have some Canada people in here. I haven't mentioned. Probably, I'm guessing 8 numbers or something like that. Maybe a Powerball, you know, like kind of number or something like that. You can play the numbers for 20 years and you're not going to hit it. Same number, 20 years, never going to hit it. There's a trillion combinations. You know, like it's not happening. You know, I'm doing it. I'm throwing numbers, the same numbers out every day on PCH. That's free. I do the free cheap lotto to win a couple million, you know, have them come to my door with a check. No, I don't know. But I'm just saying the people that are calling that, like the skeptics would say that, oh, well, it's the odds. You could be right. It just, she played the same number. Good. You know, there's a percentage of odds, you know, she's really low that she would win. But the thing is, what if she really did the dream her husband had? Because guess what? He was the one to check the ticket. And let me bet the dream he had was him checking that ticket. 20 years before. Just had to wait 20 years for those numbers to pan out. But they did. Who cares? 20 years later, you won. Retire, baby.
Yep.
You know, good for them. I want to see this news. I can't watch the news or get on social media anymore, hardly, because I can't stand the news. It's always bad. Everything's horrible. Everybody's awful. Everybody's offended. Everything. I wanted to end this World Wide Web Weird on a positive note. Sometimes I do the same. I end on a very fearful and negative note at the end of the World Wide Web Weird. I want to end on a good note. This woman won $60 million because she trusted in a dream, and the numbers got. She would be a listener of this show. She would like this show, I think. You know, this person. I like this person. Not. And if they got $60 million, and I mean they're somehow catch an episode of the show. I have a Patreon account. You can donate any amount you want. But I love this person. I love this story. Yeah, my mom won the lotto once.
You've gotten
Not a lot of money.
close. You've gotten
Yeah.
close.
Oh, I've showed Jamie. showed Jamie clips like I got 5 out of 8. So close. You know, like, yeah, you're really close, buddy. But you know, I keep playing the same numbers over and over. I don't know. None of that came to me in a dream. But if I get one in a dream, damn straight, I'm gonna start adding that to the list of numbers I play. You know, watch. I'll add it. And I'll take out a number, and then that number will. That'd be my luck. That's what I'd be for. Can I remove that number? You know, I get superstitious about those things. I used to I even did the Ouija board once. I know, bad. It's many years ago to tell it to give us what numbers. It gave us like almost the Powerball like numbers. It gave us the numbers, but the Powerball was one number off, and 2 of the other numbers were one number off. Like it teased us, like come back again and play, and I'll tell you the numbers, the whole numbers this time. Just come back.
Play
Just
with
come
us
back.
forever.
So we didn't do it again.
Yeah.
I was my wife, my cousin. We were all living in this house, and we're like, "Oh yeah, we'll do it." You know, like we're doing a lot of money. They're like, "Swear to God, it came that close." It's like teased us, just almost gave us the numbers. And I'm like, "Oh no, that's no." That's going to end up bad. But that's it for the World Wide Web of Weird. Tonight, like I said, is one of my favorite guests, Paul Anthony Wallis. He's the author of The Scars of Eden and Escaping from Eden. We've had him on. I read that book. I just started reading The Scars of Eden. I just started. He gave me a PDF copy, and I've been really busy this week. But I can't wait to get in this subject. You know, me and my wife go to sleep to ancient aliens. I've been an ancient alien theorist since I was a little kid. Like, literally, I wrote stuff as a little kid. Like, I had a theology teacher in high school ask me, you know, write about your favorite biblical character from their perspective. So I wrote it from Jesus' perspective, and I made him an alien. I got an A. She told me you're quite imaginative. But, you know, I love this topic. It's probably at all my topics up there, the number one. I know I have a lot of interests, a lot of favorites, but this is definitely number one. So after the commercial break, Paul Anthony Wallis, we're going to talk about his new book, The Scars of Eden, when we come back.
Join us every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time for Weird Wednesday, the live stream, with your hosts Jamie, the Living Dead Girl, and Rob, the Phantom, where we'll talk about all things paranormal, including zodiac, astrology, tarot card and oracle card readings, live ghost boxing and spirit communication, where we'll do Voices from Beyond, the Cold Case Files. So we hope you join us live on Facebook and YouTube every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time. We hope to see you there. Bye-bye.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Of the second kind, physical evidence of a UFO. Close encounters of the third kind, contact. From Steven Spielberg, the director of Jaws, comes one of the most ambitious and unusual films ever made. And what you will see has never been seen before. It's a cosmic mystery crossing what many scientists believe will be the next threshold of human experience. It's called Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It begins in an Indiana town and leads to one inescapable conclusion. We are not alone. Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Certificate A. Now showing at the Odeon, Leicester Square.
The night is alive. Join us and take a walk on the weird side when you tune in to The Kingdom of Nye, hosted by Heather Wade, the finest in late night talk. Listen live free weeknights starting at 9 p.m. Pacific time at thekingdomofnye.com, talkstreamlive.com, and the Paranormal Radio app. Wanna take a ride?
The international chart-topping, haunted horror of Haverfordwest has been described as terrifyingly real, a must-read, shocking and chilling brilliance, genuinely worrying, utterly frightening. Don't read before bed. Described as one of the spookiest writers out there, best-selling author G.L. Davies presents Haunted Horror of Haverfordwest, the true paranormal account that is shocking the world. Dare you enter? Dare you read? Haunted Horror of Haverfordwest is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kindle, and wherever books are sold. Pray you never have to live there.
Do you like rock and roll? Do you enjoy a good story? Wish You Were Here, A Rock Fantasy, is a book inspired by Badfinger. It will not only entertain you, but intrigue you. What is it about? Well, Thomas is searching for his bandmate and friend in heaven, and in spirit has helped pen this story. He meets an old friend and famous new ones on his afterlife voyage. Midwest Book Review said, Wish You Were Here, A Rock Fantasy, is a book inspired by Badfinger. It's a quirky story by Joyce S. Isaacson and is unique, original, and deftly crafted metaphysical novel that showcases the author's genuine flair for character and narrative-driven entertainment that is simply riveting from first page to last. Wish You Were Here, A Rock Fantasy is now available on pennantpublication.com, amazon.com in paperback and hardcover, and also on Kindle Unlimited. So check it out now. Wish You Were Here, A Rock Fantasy.
Switch to DCS ranging.
240, nominal to profile.
We're in the pipe, 5 by 5.
on Paranormal Soup, we have returning guest Paul Anthony Wallis. We talked about him before, his book about escaping from Eden. Tonight, he has his new book coming out, The Scars of Eden. Paul Anthony Wallis is a popular speaker, researcher, and author of books on spirituality and mysticism. Today, his work probes the world of mythology and ancestral narratives for their insight into human origins and human potential. His book, Escaping from Eden, has been hailed by George Noory as this generation's Chariots of the Gods, and I totally agree with George on that one. Paul hosts Paul Wallis Channel and co-hosts The Fifth Kind TV in partnership with GAIA TV. We've had him on. I think this is his third time on the show. I always enjoy getting into this subject. He's one of the most knowledgeable people I know on this subject, and I feel at a loss of words when I talk to him sometimes because I'm like just listening intently, because these are things I've been interested in research myself for many years, but man, the way he holds information in his brain is crazy. And his book, I read Escaping from Eden, I just started Scars of Eden, and it's already promising to be really good, and I'm like cherishing the book, but I didn't have a lot of time to finish it yet. I'm going to finish this book because it's already started off good. But you guys tonight, with your questions, we will take your phone calls later in the show, so probably after the next commercial break, we will open up the phone lines. Hopefully we have a better time than we did last week with the phone lines, but let's go ahead and get to our guest. All right, let me make sure we got our guest here. How you doing tonight, Paul?
Jason, it's great to be back with you again. How are you going?
Doing good. How's it all the way over in Australia?
That's right, in the sunny Australian Capital Territory. It's all good here.
I always love the time travel feeling of Australia, and one of the first Skype video callers I ever had on the show was from Australia, and you can see the bright shiny sun, and I look out my window and I see dark snow and gloom.
I love it because most people I talk to, I am in the future, talking to these people in the past.
Time travel.
That's where we are in the timeline.
Well, like I said, I'm sorry I did not get to finish I just started, honestly, Scars of Eden, but it is promising to be a really good book. I totally enjoyed Escaping from Eden. I am a big fan of Chariots of the Gods. It's the first book I ever read on this subject, and I would definitely agree with George. You definitely are the Eric Von Daniken of our time. In my opinion, I know you're probably like, oh no, but in my opinion, you're what you put in the books, you just don't affirm things I've thought. You really put out there the research and the knowledge and your biblical knowledge, and not just the Bible, other religions and areas. Just how you hold that information up here when you talk, it's amazing.
Oh, well, thank you. I was, of course, absolutely blown away and thrilled when George Noory said that, Chariots of the Gods for this generation. And then a few months ago, I actually got the opportunity to interview Eric Von Daniken.
Right.
And I thought, oh dear, has he read that quote?
Right, hope not.
Have I put his nose out of joint? Because he is definitely the Eric Von Daniken of this generation. And it turned out we had a wonderful meeting of minds, awesome. A wonderful conversation. And his name is on my front cover now for The Scars of Eden, recommending everyone to read it. So it turned out okay.
Yeah, I just thought about something. Hey, Rob, I am sharing the cover of that book. I just realized I was running so far behind, I forgot to put that in the Dropbox that we share, so Rob can share that. So that's my bad. I will get it there, Rob, if I can.
I was looking for it.
I know you are, and I'm looking for it too. I don't know why it disappeared on me. Wow, it just totally disappeared on me. I had your picture of your book. Like
we're having to show an electronic copy of the cover because it's not quite available yet. It's going to be available for pre-order at the end of the month. Otherwise, I'd be waving a solid copy of the book at you.
Well, see, I would like a solid copy of the book of this one because I actually like the cover. That's why I want to show it. And I'm so sorry. This is my bad. It's coming now, Rob. I am so sorry. It'll say Scars of Eden on it. All right, there we go. Now you can get it, Rob. It should come to you in just a second. Okay, there we go. Back to the non-technical stuff. Talk about what we like to talk about. What made you want to go into, make? I guess you do consider this kind of a sequel to Escaping from Eden. What made you want to keep digging deeper into the subject? Or I know you share some of your own personal experiences, but I want to kind of save that for later. We'll get into that in the book. What made you want to continue this research?
It is a sequel to Escaping from Eden, so anyone who's read Escaping from Eden is going to love The Scars of Eden, but it is a gateway book as well. So even if you haven't read Escaping from Eden, you can pick this book up or give this to someone, and it will take someone from zero right into this incredible story. And the thing that made me wanted to crack on and write this was a couple of things, really, because when I was researching for Escaping from Eden, I mean, the subtitle of that book tells you what it's about. Does Genesis teach that the human race was created by God or engineered by ETs? And I knew if I put a book out with that subtitle, that might upset some people, and that particularly people of faith might shy away from that and think, oh, this is some kind of an attack on our faith. And certainly it does ask some very fundamental questions about our ideas about our origins as a species and our ideas about God and what story we think the Bible tells. And so I realized I should probably sit down with my parents-in-law, who are devout Christians.
Yeah.
And just give them a little advance notice of what this new book is about that their dear son-in-law has written. So we invited them around for the weekend. Kofi and Patience, they are from Ghana originally. They now live in Australia. And so we spent the weekend together. We had a lovely Sunday lunch of Ghanaian cuisine, a little wine, and everyone's relaxed and happy. And maybe this is a moment I can just slip into the conversation. Oh, by the way, I have a new book coming out. Let me tell you what it's about. There's the cover of The Scars of Eden. That's what it looks like.
I love the cover.
And so as tactfully as I could, I told them about Escaping from Eden and how my study of the Hebrew texts and questions of translation had shown me that there is another story hidden in plain sight in the ancient Hebrew texts that have a completely different explanation of who we are, where we came from, and stories that for generations we've read as God stories. Well, actually, they turn out to be a retelling of the Sumerian, Babylonian, Akkadian, Assyrian stories. And it's a story of our ancestors being visited by beings from other planets who come here, have a hands-on involvement in our development as a species. They manage us, they colonize us, and they adapt us. And those stories are really there in the Bible, in the Old Testament, when you tackle these translation questions, and it totally reframes our understanding of who we are. So I was sharing this story and trying to get a gauge of how is this going down, because they were giving no reaction.
Oh,
and
God.
So I explained all this as gently as I could. And I said, there were serious church fathers right at the beginning of the church who said the things I'm saying. They read the text this way, no reaction. Well, I get to the end, and my father-in-law, who's a very big man, and I'm thinking, what's this going to do to our family dynamic, this new information? And he leans forward and he says, Paul, a penny has dropped. And then my mother-in-law leant forward and said, Paul, we already know this story. And they explained to me that, yes, Ghana is a Christian country. Yes, they are believers of Baptist, Pentecostal, Foursquare kind of background, but that Ghanaians know about this, my mother-in-law said. There is another layer of story that's been curated by Ghanaian people for generation after generation after generation, and it's the story you just told us, she said. And we have friends of our family, she said, who have experienced the kind of contact and interference that your book talks about. So now it was my turn to sit open-mouthed as I listened to this story from within our own family. I have Ghanaian heritage as well that I knew nothing about. And they told me about a friend of the family who, this is now about 40 years ago, who went missing for 3 years. And she reappeared on a beach in Ghana, West Africa, found her way home, and her parents were absolutely thrilled that she had returned safely, but they couldn't understand where she had been, why she hadn't been able to contact them, and they expected, a story of a failed elopement, or she'd been kidnapped, or she'd been, part of a human trafficking thing. That's the kind of story they expected. And it took a long time before this girl, the name I use for her in The Scars of Eden is Akuya. And Akuya bit by bit opens up and she says, yes, she was kidnapped. Yes, she was held against her will for 3 years. Yes, she was made to bear children. for her hosts.
Oh, man.
But that her hosts, she didn't know where she was. She felt she was in an underwater base, and it became clear to her that her hosts looked human but were not human. And then at the end of the story, she said, Mummy and Daddy, they were the mummy water people. Now, when her parents heard this, they certainly hadn't expected to hear it, but it was not the first they'd heard a story like this. The mummy water people is a tradition centuries old. The name is more recent because it's an anglicized version of an old tradition. But for centuries, Ghanaians have been bringing these reports of abduction, taking to an underwater base used for hybridization, and then returned after 2, 3, 4 years. And I heard that story. I was absolutely amazed by it, shocked that this story was so close to our own family. And it sent me on a journey of research. And I was soon to learn that these stories are not just ages old in Ghana. You can go to Nigeria, go to Kenya, go all up the western seaboard of Africa, go into the Caribbean, Brazil, Haiti, Cuba, go as far east as the Philippines. All those elements of the story repeat. You go to the Philippines and they have vocabulary that is centuries old that was developed purely for explaining these stories. That's the only reason they have these words. And so they have the word Lamangdagat, those who dwell under the sea. Dili Ingonato, those who are unlike us. Duatas, which comes from a Sanskrit word, which suggests there are Indian roots to this story. Oh, wow. You go to Europe, the story's ages old there. Europe is named after one of these abductees, Europa, who was abducted by a non-human entity and had a hybrid child called Minos, who was the progenitor of the Minoan culture. In Greece, you're taught this as history when you go through school. Of course, it's in the Norse legends. You go to Europe, and I discovered I've got Welsh blood as well. I discovered there's a Welsh iteration of this story as well, the story of Tylwyth Teg. I have a friend, G.L. Davies, the paranormal researcher. You've interviewed him about his incredible book, Harvest. And that tells us that these stories of contact, abduction, hybridization are not only ages old in Wales, they are current right to the present day. And that's what Harvest is all about. Go to Ireland. Again, they've got these strange ways of referring to these people, the good people, the noble people, the other crowd. And it's always indirect because the understanding is that the other crowd are a covert presence. They don't want to be talked about.
The Watchers.
Exactly. And then Scotland. In Scotland, I discovered Robert Kirk, who had gone there as a Presbyterian minister. Now, I probably don't need to tell you, Presbyterian is pretty conservative within the spectrum of Christian churches, Reformed, conservative, evangelical. The minister went there, spent a long time in the parish listening to the locals and hearing their stories, and he put together a book called The Secret Commonwealth, explaining how his worldview had shifted. And the book taught that there is another presence on this planet, a covert presence that looks human but is not, and is involved in abductions, hybridization. And he wrote that book in the 1600s. Wow. So I discovered beginning from my lunch with my parents-in-law that these stories are ages old. They exist all around the world. And much as I might have liked to have written a book that didn't have abduction and hybridization in it, because I think that you're really in at the deep end as soon as you mention those words. You really are.
Deep in the rabbit hole.
But I couldn't avoid it. I thought, if I'm going to continue this track of exploring world mythology, I cannot avoid talking about this, because this is the most commonly recurring theme of what our ancestors had to tell us about our place in the universe. So that was a start point. One more, I know I've given you a long answer, but I knew I had to write a sequel as people began contacting me after Escaping from Eden was published and sharing their own experiences. People of all kinds from all around the world, every country I could think of. And the largest demographics I've heard from have been students of ancient texts, including Christian pastors, who've seen what I've seen in the texts,
Exactly.
and have said, I need to process this. I've got no one I'm allowed to talk to about this. And the other group has been veterans of war, who've gone into the theater of war thinking they're going to fight for freedom, or to free the Kurds from Saddam Hussein, or to free the world from weapons of mass destruction. And they get there and they discover they're on an archaeological mission that has to do with ancient history that must not be told. And when they have those experiences, they're so dislocated from their own lives, their own country, their own understanding of the world, and even more profoundly who we are, that they have to find someone to talk to. And many people have sought me out for those reasons. And as those experiences mounted, I knew I had to do more, and I had to respond, and I had to go further. And that's what the Scars of Eden is.
Oh man, that alien abduction, that for a lot of people, that's like, okay. You know, they draw the line there. Maybe seen a UFO, but no way. You know, I've seen that skepticism. I've heard it. I don't care. I believe people when they tell me it's happened to them. I maybe my own experiences in that realm too. I'm trying to deal with. But for people that are being abducted, especially in the hybrid programs, we had Erin Montgomery on a few weeks ago, who was introduced to me from Terry Lovelace, another abductee, but she was definitely part of a hybrid program, where she's being used to breed children. And you talk about these families or these people being taken, like this girl being taken for, how long was she taken for?
3 years.
3 years. Oh my God. So what makes me think is, they're all around these island areas. There's an underwater base. There's underwater base. One, if you're going to do a hybrid program and you need a constant flow of DNA and interaction, whatever, you want something close by. So these islands are probably getting hit because of the location of the base. But two, you can't do as much of that here, and you can't take somebody for 3 years in America without a lot of notice.
Well, yes, I think one of the reasons I've written The Scars of Eden, and the reason I've written it in the way I have, is that I've discovered through people contacting me that these phenomena of contact and stories of abduction are far more widespread than we've ever imagined. Because people contact me with report of those experiences, and they will often be people in their 60s who say to me something like this: I have spoken to my spouse about what happened, and I've spoken to the person I was with when the thing happened, and I haven't told another living, breathing soul in the 50 years since it happened. And that is the power of the fear of ridicule and the power of the kind of shaming and mockery that we put upon people when they tell stories like this. And because of that, we have the impression that it's only a few random, extreme, strange people who come up with these stories. If we would actually take that ridicule away for a moment, and if we were to sit down in our friendship circle or in our family circle, just like I did with my parents-in-law, I don't think there'd be a friendship circle or a family circle anywhere that wouldn't have a story to tell that touches on phenomena like these. And like me, you would think, why have I never heard this before? And the answer is because we're so ready to make a joke of it and ridicule people who share stories that they know are going to count against them. Nobody thinks they're going to get a job or make a fortune from sharing an absurd story. They know they're going to be thought less of for sharing it. And I think that is reason enough that when somebody comes forward with a story like that, you should listen with respect. Ask, why are they sharing this? What have they experienced it? And how do I respond to this story? But you've got to listen first. And if you want to listen, you have to listen with respect.
Well, the Larry King, not to speak ill of the dead because he just recently passed away, I remember he laughed at Whitley Strieber when Whitley Strieber described being, anally raped, basically, by the aliens. They were putting a thing to make him ejaculate, up his rectum, and he's talking about this in very personal, hard detail, and Larry King laughed at him. He regret, I remember Art Bell mentioned he talked to Larry King and he regretted doing that, but that's what Willie Strieber had to face,
I know.
When he went on a national TV to be laughed at. And that was horrible for this field. That was horrible for every abductee out there to see something like that.
Oh,
and I
absolutely.
think Whitley Strieber knew
Who's
that.
going to speak? Who's going to speak after watching that happen to a credible witness like Whitley Strieber? I do wonder, and I do hope that our culture might be shifting a little bit, because
I think so.
Australia is not any more welcoming of these kinds of stories than any other culture in particular.
Right.
In fact, people are very, very cynical and ready to make a joke of these things. So much so that about 30 years ago, John Mack went on the TV. He was on the Australian 60 Minutes. They were talking to him about the research he had done for U.S. Defense. Well, U.S. Defense
serious researcher.
Yeah, absolutely. He was the top of his field. He was the director of clinical psychology for Harvard. And American Defense had gone to him because they couldn't think of a more credible, authoritative person in the field of psychiatry or clinical psychology to assess military personnel who had reported abduction experiences. And what the Air Force wanted to know was, are these people safe to fly? So they engaged him. He studied about 50, and he came to the conclusion that they were psychologically quite sound. There was no pathology to them. And the method he used showed him that something objective had experienced. They'd all experienced the same objective thing. And he was saying, we need to look at what this is. And it's going to challenge our worldview, but we cannot not study this further. Well, Richard Carlton, who was an award-winning journalist for 60 Minutes out here in Australia, interviewed John Mack. And purely because that was his conclusion, he felt free to make an absolute mockery of him. He felt free to assume he was a better psychiatrist than John Mack. He was a better judge of these people he had never examined than John Mack, the chief of clinical psychology for Harvard, purely because he said, no, they've experienced something real.
That's real.
Well, 30 years later, to my amazement, I saw Ita Buttrose, who is the chair of Australian ABC, interview a lady called Jane Pooley, who had one of these abduction hybridization stories. And she's a very sane, normal-looking lady. She's worked as a clinical nurse for 30 years. She has 3 regular children, and then she says she's had 2 hybridized children through a sequence of close encounters over a 30-year period. Ita Buttrose, very credible figure in Australian society, interviewed her with total respect. Now, it was non-committal.
Right.
She didn't listen and say, oh, I believe what you're saying is correct.
But she gave her respect. She listened.
She gave a respectful hearing. And I felt very hopeful having watched that, because that didn't happen for John Mack 30 years ago. And now that respect is being given to somebody none of us have heard of, a nurse from New South Wales, who is part of a massive phenomenon, far more wide than we've ever imagined it to be.
What we need is they have the Me Too moment. We need an Alien 2 moment or something. Like, we need an openness for people to be able to feel comfortable to come out. That's why I do this show. You're not going to be ridiculed to come on here and tell me about your experience, because people need that. That's one of the beauties of the internet. It is giving people more communication to connect with others and be like, yes, I experienced that same thing, and to learn. And I definitely see us growing in that way. I mean, for myself, I made a personal choice a long time ago with anybody, if they wanted to talk to me about their religion, Christianity or whatever, Buddhism, Hinduism, I'm like, cool, I love this topic, to talk about this, but I'm going to tell you what I think too.
Sure.
And I will not hedge. I would never shy away from talking about ancient aliens in the past and the evidence of that.
Definitely. And you're right. I mean, that is the power of the internet, of Google, of YouTube. And why I love shows like this. In the past, that opportunity hasn't been there. But at least in America, there has been the phenomenon of local radio. And there have been radio shows that for decades have that have carried the candle for these things and given a space where people could share these stories. And obviously I'm thinking of Art Bell and that kind of tradition. We haven't had that in Australia. It hasn't existed in Europe or the UK. And so the rest of the world has had less priming for this subject than I think Americans have had. And even though it's been treated with a lot of scorn and mockery, it has been out there a little bit more. But the Scars of Eden is really an invitation to people all around the world to bring out the ancestral stories and their own stories and share what we at a grassroots level have been experiencing and begin listening to each other and joining the dots.
What I love seeing, I mean, what I love about you, Paul, is you are a Christian. You believe in Jesus Christ and all that. For myself, I've always been fascinated by Jesus Christ. I've never scorned people for having faith. I'm agnostic, means I don't know. I question everything. So why would I scorn you when I don't know? You could be right. Jesus could be the Lord and Savior. I don't know. But I definitely know he was somebody that made a really big impact on history. And the Bible is littered. I love seeing when I've talked to Christians and we have a good conversation, it's open dialogue. And I've had plenty of those. People think Christians are, no, they're just so close-minded. That's not true. That is so not true. Most Christians I know are not. They are open-minded people that can talk about this stuff. I hate how the media over the years has tried to portray Christians as closed-minded. Yes, there's plenty of them. There's plenty of closed-minded atheists too. You know what I'm saying? But I've had plenty of really good conversations on this topic, and either of us have walk away with still our same beliefs, but good topics. And I love seeing them acknowledge when I bring up instances in the Bible. I'm like, you see that as God. This is where I see it as possibly alien interaction. And one of the biggest ones is all the messengers and the births. When you talk about Jesus, John the Baptist, Isaac, all those right there, to me, that's the hybrid program right there.
That is a fascinating subject, and I talk about this in the Scars of Eden. And it's it is a sensitive topic because Christianity has traditionally presented the story of Jesus's birth and the virgin birth and the conception announced by the angel as the reason for his uniqueness. But anyone who reads the Gospels knows actually it's not a unique story. His cousin, John the Baptist, exactly the same experience. This being called an angel turns up and speaks to a woman who actually can't have children. And by some, the ancients would say supernatural means, we would say by some artificial means, the woman then becomes pregnant and gives birth to somebody who's very, very significant. So already you've got Jesus and his mom Mary. They have the same experience as John and his mom Elizabeth. Read the Hebrew scriptures and you realize those stories are either based on or they're a very similar experience to the story of the birth of Samson or the birth of Isaac, child of Abraham and Sarah.
Exactly.
Now, where the plot thickens is that the story of Abraham and Sarah is an encounter with what the Sumerians called sky people. And my research in the Scars of Eden shows very clearly that the people who turn up and speak to Abraham and Sarah were the sky people of the Sumerian, Akkadian, Assyrian, Babylonian stories. They were extraterrestrial people who looked human, but were not. So Abraham and Sarah have a close encounter of the, umpteenth kind, because it results in an artificial pregnancy and a birth of somebody remarkable and historic. So now we realize that the stories of the conception of Jesus and John the Baptist are based on a close encounter with an ET.
Exactly.
And then a little more research, and I talk about this in the Scars of Eden, it's not just in the Hebrew tradition, it's not just in the Christian tradition. Go to China, listen to the story of the mother of Lao Tzu, another incredibly important person, the founder of Taoism, or the mother of the Yellow Emperor, a very significant cultural figure in China. And those women tell the same story. Now, two interesting things here. You read those two stories, and the way it's told is this. The mother had a close encounter with an object in space, which beamed something like a laser beam upon them, and as a result, there was a pregnancy. That's how it's told. Now, if you go to the Italian artist Carlo Crivelli, and I'm trying to remember when he painted this, I think it's 1468, he paints a painting called The Annunciation, which is the moment when Mary conceives Jesus. And what is it? It's a painting of a laser beam from a UFO in the sky.
It's like piercing right down into the, you'll see it, it's like at an angle, it pierces right down into,
So it's been painted in exactly the way that the ancient Chinese described their anomalous pregnancies. Now, someone might listen to that and say, all right, look, that's fine. All we've got is some culture saying, here's somebody really important. Clearly, there has to be something magical about their birth. They can't just be an ordinary person. So they make up these stories involving the heavens or supernatural beings or whatever it is. Except that I now know that that experience is widespread and it is being experienced by women to this day who don't talk about it.
Exactly.
It's not a story you can boast with in the 21st century. These stories are held very, very privately. But if you can win somebody's trust and hear the story, you will hear a story like that, an experience of light, a pregnancy they can't explain, and a child who has a level of intelligence or sensitivity that's highly unusual. And so people talk about indigo children and star children.
Yeah.
And the moment you begin researching that, you realize, back to your question, that the story of Jesus fits in this much, much bigger pattern, and that he's pointing to a far more cosmic and widespread phenomenon than we generally believe.
And that's when you really touch on a sensitive subject with some Christians on that, like you're saying Jesus is an alien, I don't know.
Yeah, well, it is.
I don't know. It's $1 million. My son was asking me last night, where do people come from? Like, who was the first family or first people? I'm like, it's good questions, kiddo. Good questions.
Good question. Good question. But the moment you have a universe with other beings in it, it immediately rolls onto these other questions.
Exactly.
What's the implication for God? What's the implication for Jesus? What is the bigger story we're all part of? And I ask these questions not to, debunk or destroy people's faith traditions, but to go back and say, well, what are we being told here? What is the story? What do these words? This word we think means angel. What's the root of that? This word we translated as God. What is the root of that word? The original hearers of this story, what did they hear when it was told? And that's my motivation, to understand the text, to dig into them and work out what is the story that is hidden in plain sight in what we think are very familiar texts.
Well, that's what everybody says. Well, the Bible's been translated, so many times, and exactly, there's the deep original meaning to these words. I always love when you, from Escaping from Eden, when you talked about the Elohim, how if you replace in the Genesis and then with the word God and replace it with Elohim, it means it changes the story.
It completely reframes the story. If you translate it by its root meaning, the powerful ones, a lot of the what's going on moments in the Bible, and there are so many of them, why would God do that kind of moments, they actually resolve and start making sense when you realize you're reading the story of a community of beings in conflict with one another.
Exactly.
And when you translate that as a single being, as God, it looks like God's having arguments with himself, changing his mind, falling over
God
his
look
feet,
like a
making
jerk.
mistakes. It does. And a monster from time to time.
Yeah.
When you realize, no, actually, there's a whole community of beings here and they're conflicting over what to do with the human beings, suddenly a lot of these stories begin making sense. And not in a random way. They make sense in a way that parallels the ancestral narratives of cultures all around the world.
When I thought, one of the things that came to my mind right when you were talking about the beam too, the laser beam, is Terry Lovelace I've had on, who's an alien abductee, had his major experience. It started with this triangle UFO and a beam of light, a laser beam of light, just a thin laser beam of light that shot down on his campsite. These things have been touching and reaching out and taking people and doing things for thousands and thousands of years. I've always said, we have the whole disclosure movement happening. We're seeing stuff coming out of the Pentagon. I'm highly doubtful of of a lot of the disclosure. I put in quote marks. But I've always said the real disclosure already happened. It's all there in these ancient texts. It's been in front of us the whole time.
It really is. You've just got to read. You've just got to listen. You know, when people hear someone say, "Oh, I was abducted by an alien," and react as if they'd never heard the like of it, we've been told the like by our ancestors generation after generation. It's just that we haven't listened, or we haven't taken it seriously, or because it uses a mythical type word, we put it all in the fiction basket.
Jonah and the whale, you know,
we
perfect
have been
example.
told these things for a long, long time.
Yeah,
and you talk about disclosure. I mean, you know, it's one thing to want governments to come clean about what they know, but that's not the be-all and end-all of disclosure. Again, if we listen to one another, peer-to-peer, listen to our friends and family, and if we can listen without prejudice, there's a huge wave of grassroots disclosure that could happen right there.
That's
but
what I said.
I do think there is something new. Yeah, we do. There is something new in the air, though, I think, right now. I think the level of authority and credibility of people making announcements is something different to what we've seen in the past.
I would say things. This is my problem with where we stand on disclosure is you don't know who to trust. I don't trust the government. They might disclose things, but I don't know what they're disclosing is actually a truth or misdirection. You know,
yes, that's true.
I believe in people. That's why I said believe we need a Me Too movement. We need people like Terry Lovelace and Aaron Montgomery and all these Whitley Strieber, all these people, you know, that've come out so far. They need others. We need everybody to start coming out and talking about it and feeling they can. I mean, we have people talking about being abused by other people. Well, we need to talk about the either alien abuse or alien. I mean, to me, it's abuse to take somebody without their permission. You know,
exactly.
I mean, we need people to start talking about it.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And one thing that I really want to put out there in the Scars of Eden is, you know, it's always fun to listen to a dramatic story. Someone who's got a story of a beam of light, you know, taking them up into a ship or whatever. But I think there are many more people out there who have had experiences that they're not sure what happened to them, where they'll say, something happened, I just have this fragmentary memory, something weird was going on, and I don't know what happened next.
That's me.
And that's me as well. And I reckon, again, any friendship circle, any family circle, you'll say, there'll be someone there saying, that's me.
And for myself, it was really hard. One, it took me a long time to realize that I ignored these experiences, being all the weird person that I am. But then it was even harder for me to, even on this show, doing this show where I tell everybody else to be open about it. It's hard for me to talk about it because I'm not sure of it. You know, I'm like,
exactly.
You know how that's hard.
That's exactly right. And same for me, exactly the same for me. So after Escaping from Eden came out, I had people contacting me very vulnerably, sharing their stories with me. And often they'd just test me out just to see if they really felt they could trust me with this story they hadn't told in 50 years. And then they'd tell me their story, and then they'd say, Paul, what's your experience been? Have you had a close encounter? And my answer at the beginning was, no, I haven't. But the more stories I heard, I started joining some dots and thinking, hang on.
Exactly.
Just wait a minute. Give me a minute here, because something did happen to me when I was 20, and I never understood what that thing was. And then I realized a whole number of things happened to me when I was 20 that didn't make sense. They didn't add up. And I realized I now have a new framework to bring to those experiences and can begin filling in the gaps and realizing what probably happened. But it's a story. If I share it, it sounds like nothing. It sounds like nothing happened. And I heard one day from a lady, I talk about her in the Scars of Eden, and I call her Patricia. And she had an experience as a student. She was studying in a city called Portales, New Mexico. And she had an encounter with some people that really disturbed her and freaked her out. And she would have been about 20 years old at the time. and she's now a mature lady, probably approaching retirement age. I hope I haven't got that wrong. She's she's listening in, and she shares this story that sounds like a story of nothing. Why were these people different? Why were they disturbing? Why did she come away wondering if they were human? And she hasn't told that story to many because it doesn't sound like anything, except, 40 years later, 35 years later, she can't forget that experience. She can't shake the uneasy feeling of what happened. And so very vulnerably, she shared that story with me. And after she shared her story, I thought, I have to honor the people who have shared very vulnerably with me. And I have to honor all the others out there who, like me, have got half a memory and are just not sure what it is. And for that reason, don't like talking about it. And if I can't share mine, why should I expect them to share theirs?
Yeah,
and
exactly
so
how I thought.
I have put that in the book. I put all those thought processes. I've spelt out what the bizarre things were, and you can make up your own mind if you think something happened or you don't think anything happened. But it's there as an encouragement to say, do you have a half memory? Or does
I can't wait to get to that
have a
part in the
half
book.
memory like that?
I can't wait to get to that part in the book. Honestly, when I found out you had your own personal experiences and they're in this book, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to get to that part because I want to see. Because this is how we the Me Too movement of alien abduction. We have you connect the dots. It makes you think. Like for my own personal journey in it, it's just like I'm amazed at how I looked away from these things for so long, mainly because they're, like you said, they're half memories. I can't say that's real. I don't know. I mean, if I was taken aboard a ship and had the full memory of it, I'd be the first one out there to say, here it happened to me, But when you have like I said, like you're missing so many pieces of an experience, you can't, it's fragments.
Yeah.
You question, like, did it happen? Am I being influenced? What but
and
again,
if the fragments don't fit into the conventional boxes, then how do you even tell the story?
Right.
So, I mean, for me, for instance, there was a long time when my universe fitted into animal, vegetable, mineral, human, God, devil, angel, demons, and there were no other boxes. And so if I experienced something that didn't seem to be any of those, well, then you can't really tell the story.
Right. You don't know the picture. You don't know the story. You don't know the background. You don't know.
You don't know the story. You don't know what to say. And if you're in a faith community where, it's kind of taught those are the only boxes, well, how do you tell the story there?
Yeah. I mean, just think about this too. I mean, you talk about the examples in the Bible of these, of these miraculous conceptions. I mean, like Sarah. How old was she in the Bible? Like to have a baby? She was
post-menopause, we're told.
Yeah, she was almost 100 years old or something like that. I don't know. It was like a crazy age to have a baby.
Her husband was that age, and I'm not sure if we're told she was a little bit younger than him, but she couldn't have kids. I mean, that's the whole point of the story.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So, you see, the language, we have language now for what happened, and it comes back to how do we translate texts. Because we have technical language. We can say laser beam, we can say wormhole, we can say close encounter, we can say rocket launch, we can say artificial insemination, genetic modification, in vitro fertilization. We have language like that to describe phenomena that the ancients experienced. And we can read experiences they're reporting. We can read the landing of a rocket fuel-based craft, such as happens in the experience of Elijah, and know what's being talked about. Whereas if you had a Bible translator, 200 years ago working on that Hebrew text, wouldn't have any of that technical language, would never have seen a rocket launch, wouldn't know what a wormhole was, and so just in the work of translation would turn it into something else inadvertently. And there are some really, I have to say, I find it amusing attempts to translate what is technology in the Bible as something else. And one of the most extreme examples of this is what happens when Moses encounters Yahweh when Yahweh lands in a craft, has a conversation with Moses for several days, and then launches the craft. And Moses says, "Can I see your big heavy thing, your kavod?" And Yahweh says, "Well, you can't be on the surface out in the open when it moves, otherwise it'll kill you. So I'm going to have to shelter you in a cleft in the rock, and then you'll be able to see it moving away." Now, anyone who's seen a rocket launch understands perfectly what all those instructions mean. 500 years ago, when Bible translators were trying to translate that text, they'd never seen a rocket launch. They didn't know anything about what it would mean to be standing out in the open when the rocket launches. And so they translate these words differently. Kavod becomes glory. Pane now means face to face instead of out in the open. Tub, what does that mean? Means goodness instead of goods. And you end up with this translation that says Moses can't see God face to face except for the times when he can, and then he can for several days, and then when he can't, he can't see God's face, but he can see God's goodness, but he can only see God's goodness from behind as it's moving away. With all due respect, that is not coherent. But the translators didn't have anywhere else to turn.
Didn't have a frame of reference.
Had no frame of reference. But the wonderful thing is that there has been a very faithful transmission of the Hebrew texts, the manuscripts. We actually can go back to the ancient language and have another go at translating it with all the frameworks that we have today and say, we think we understand what the ancients were talking about. Kudos to our friends 200 years ago who had a go. But I think we have a clearer picture now of what was going on.
Yeah, we've seen enough science fiction to understand. Yeah, they're talking about a UFO.
It is no insult. It is no disrespect to the translators who went before. It's just that we have that framework now.
Yeah, they didn't see E.T. You know what I'm saying? They didn't have any kind of frame of reference for that. So yeah, you can imagine how if we could just talk to the original people that witnessed it, we'd be like, oh yeah, you saw a UFO. You know, like that's what happened.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, we have a name for that. Yeah, that's right.
Exactly. I was going to say too, you know, right now, I mean, we talk about ridicule and that. I have to imagine there's women out there who've had children that they knew they had that was totally immaculate conception. They're not going out to the streets and proclaiming it because they love their child. Would you do that to your child? Would you put them out in the open and risk them? I mean, if you read all the government conspiracies and you hear all this stuff, they're like, my child's an alien, then the government picks them up. You know, we have plenty of that out there in the fiction and everything to at least scare a parent enough to say, keep their mouth quiet about it. You know, that, okay, I'm not going to tell anybody that I never father, you know, there was no father. This child came, you know, from nowhere.
It's such a sensitive thing, obviously. I have a friend who's a pastor who in her church, she noticed this boy, and he would have been, I think, about 4 years old. And she noticed that there was something very different about him. He had a calmness, an incredible level of intelligence and sensitivity. She got into conversation with him one day, and he said, I used to be a scientist. And she said, you used to be a scientist? Yes, but it wasn't here. It was on another planet.
Oh, wow.
And she thought, oh, this is very interesting, because he was so cogent. He was so clear. He was only 4.
Right.
But
if you're a parent and have a kid, you understand how incredible that is.
My friend thought, I need to meet the parents. So she went and visited the parents. And in a very, I don't know how she did this. She's a lady. Perhaps she can ask these questions. But she asked the mum, was there anything unusual about Jack's birth or his
conception?
And yes, there was. And it turned out to be one of these Star Children stories of an anomalous experience on the night that Jack was conceived. A story that there's no way this mother would tell people, go around boasting about. And it was only when it was broached very sensitively that she answered. And this lady had a number of children, but there was something very unique and different about the conception of Jack. Now, The pastor found out because she noticed something about Jack and she asked the question. But how many other experiences are out there like that where there's no way anyone's going to ask that question and get the answer? And that's why I say these stories are held so closely, so tightly, that when you go back to the famous ones, I think you have to read them differently. The stories of Jesus, John the Baptist, Lao Tzu, the Yellow Emperor, Samson, Isaac, there's a context to them.
Exactly. Well, that's exactly my point. Is that as a parent, me myself now being a parent, I know my first instinct is to protect my child. I'd keep that truth very close because I wouldn't want people to know or put in danger my child for saying, he's something, special from the stars or he's alien. If I truly thought that he was miraculously conceived, I wouldn't want anybody to know. I would keep it quiet because I'd feel they would be in danger if people knew.
Well, you wouldn't want your child to be experimented on or examined.
No, exactly.
And you wouldn't want to get yourself, flagged, with child services as is this a suitable parent,
right?
So
that you have to be concerned about that.
Told.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe you have a better chance in America of being able to talk about it a little bit and not be worried about your child. But in other countries, you could be a real big danger if you talk about it. This is the thing. This is a dark underlying thing that's been happening for thousands of years, I believe. I think it's, it's ongoing genetic experiments. I don't know what the end game of it is, but this is throughout our history. I mean, look at the Greek and Roman gods. How many of the half human, half god, Hercules. I mean, all these stories are always interactions of gods having sex with people, and having children. And to me, that's always pointed to some kind of hybridization of mankind or some influence. I think some of the great leaders of the world were placed there by something else, whatever that is.
Exactly. And as I say, in Greece, it gets taught as history when you've got the story of Europa and Zeus and Minos. And then anyone studying the Bible, they've got it there in Genesis 6. And as soon as you hear those stories, you have to say, well, what's the context? Where's this come from?
Well, we got to go to commercial break. When we get back, one of the things I would like to cover, because I'm a little personally interested in this, because I'm working on don't tell Gavin, I'm working on a fictional novel, or bringing back a fictional novel I tried working on years ago, and I'm really interested in some of you said soldiers, people who were on the front lines that get involved in archaeology. It was really interesting you bring that up tonight. Because it's just within the last day or two, I started picking up an old story idea I had of mine and reworking it to this idea. And you bring this up, so now I got to hear a little bit of that. But we got to go to commercial break, and then we'll open the phone lines when we come back from this commercial break. So after the commercial break, call in with your questions tonight. I know I got some people in there they got some questions. Call in tonight. I'm hoping all the phone lines are straight this time, unlike last week with our guests. I feel so bad about last week, and I know I missed a couple phone calls. Tonight, I hope that doesn't happen, but we will be back after a short commercial break.
Into the combined effects of sensory deprivation and hallucinatory drugs. The subject of the experiment is himself, and the experiment is out of control. Ken Russell's Altered States, a film that must not be missed, is in the West End now. Altered States, Certificate X.
Do you wish for more paranormal and spiritual content? The Paranormal Chronicles magazine is a free digital magazine crammed with the very best in paranormal and spiritual articles and features. No sign-up, no subscription, just free reading and knowledge for you. Read today at www.paranormalchronicles.com/magazine.
come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope.
That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
The night is alive. Join us and take a walk on the weird side when you tune in to the Kingdom of Nye, hosted by Heather Wade, the finest in late night talk. Listen live free weeknights starting at 9 p.m. Pacific time at thekingdomofnye.com, talkstreamlive.com, and the Paranormal Radio app. Wanna take a ride?
Join us every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time for Weird Wednesday, the live stream, with your hosts Jamie, the Living Dead Girl, and Rob, the Phantom, where we'll talk about all things paranormal, including zodiac, astrology, tarot card and oracle card readings, live ghost boxing and spirit communication, where we'll do Voices from Beyond, the Cold Case Files. So we hope you join us live on Facebook and YouTube every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time. We hope to see you there. Bye-bye.
Paranation Magazine is a new paranormal magazine based out of Denver, Colorado. Our goal isn't just to give you the best paranormal content out there, but to promote paranormal unity. We're doing this by giving everyone an opportunity to tell their stories and to share their experiences. For more information, follow us on Facebook at Paranation Magazine and soon, paranationmag.com.
I've Never Met a Dead Person I Didn't Like is the extraordinary travels of a young, alone, and broke psychic in the highly anticipated new book from internationally renowned psychic, medium, medical intuitive, and best-selling author Sherry Dillard. Critics have described I've Never Met a Dead Person I Didn't Like as an engrossing memoir, an empowering story of how a broken girl came to accept her psychic gift, a refreshing and fun read. I've Never Met a Dead Person I Didn't Like is available through Amazon, Kindle, Barnes & Noble, and wherever books are sold.
Tired of school?
Who was Joan of Arc?
Noah's wife? Like to travel?
Let's go back into history. Let's reach out and touch someone.
Want to meet people in the past?
Put them in the Iron Maiden. Iron Maiden? Excellent! Execute them. Otis.
Then hitch a ride with George Carlin, Keanu Reeves, and Alex Winter in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure from Orion Pictures.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from Talkstream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
Please, Spock, do me a favor, and don't say it's fascinating. No. But it is interesting.
You're listening to Paranormal Soup, bringing you the weird every Sunday night. Call into the show and join the discussion at Call-in lines are 219-230-4444 or 260-225-9419. Or by Skype caller ID Jblandoo or Jblandparanormalsoup. And now to your host, Jason Bland.
Tonight, we're talking to guest Paul Anthony Wallis. He's the author of Escaping from Eden and now his newest book, The Scars of Eden. We're talking about ancient aliens, people, my definitely favorite topic. Tonight, the phone lines are all open. Again, like last week, we had issues. I'm hoping tonight we don't. Let me make sure those are open for you guys. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. For me, this goes back to my fascination ever since I was a kid. I was like 10 years old. I read Chariots of the Gods. Even before I read Chariots of the Gods, maybe it's the Star Trek in me, believed that we were put here by aliens, or our DNA was affected by aliens. That all this, when I heard Bible stories as a kid, I always was like, yeah, I think that's aliens. It's been wired in me. Maybe it's my mom's influence. I mean, I grew up in an open household, but for me, I've always looked at that facet, that it's aliens. I was way before Ancient Aliens. That's why I love this topic, and I love Paul Anthony Wallis being a Christian, but looking deeply at each word and the meaning and what the original translation is. To me, the disclosure happened thousands of years ago. We just haven't been able to translate it till now. And that's what we're talking about. Phone lines are open. Call in and join the discussion, but let's get back to our guest. Thank you for staying with me, Paul. Phone lines are open. People call in. We will take your calls, but we're going to continue this conversation because you brought up that you, after escaping from Eden, that you were getting a lot of contacts from people, and you mentioned soldiers on missions they didn't know were going to turn out to be archaeological. And one of the things I am working on a fictional story. I gave up about 3 years ago on reworking it because on this idea of a soldier encountering something ancient. On a mission, and you brought that up. My interest of like what? That's just what I'm thinking about. I've been thinking about it all day, and so I got to hear this because I don't. Have you ever heard the Kandahar giant story?
Yes.
That when I first heard that one, I don't know if it's real. I've had my doubts, but the story itself is super interesting to me, especially when you talk about giants. And that is this the kind of stuff we're talking about when you have soldiers reaching out to you?
It's very interesting. I hear from people every week, and some weeks it's every day. And many of those who contact me are people who have been deployed in the theater of war, and some identify themselves that way. And very often, if the person is a veteran and retired, they will tell me openly, this is who I am, this is where I was deployed, this is what happened. I suspect I'm hearing from others who are still in service who don't identify themselves, who are still in active service and they don't identify themselves that way. But I've heard from quite a number who were involved in the 2003 incursion into Iraq. And, it is just a fact that when there is a war happening, there will be layers of reason for that war. There will be a public reason, and there will be other negotiations going on as to why it's happening and what the desired outcomes are. And so, with that incursion, the public reasons were to do with saving the Kurds, getting weapons of mass destruction, disabling, something to do with Al-Qaeda, all that. And then there were some other reasons. So people suspected, is this really about oil? Is it another oil war like Afghanistan? But then soldiers went in, and a number of units found their assignment had nothing to do with those things. Their assignment had to do with going to ancient archaeological sites, retrieving items, taking them back to America so that they could be kept secretly. Now, what's interesting about that is that these artifacts touch on some of the oldest human narratives that exist on this planet. We're talking about hard copy of those narratives, and we're talking about artifacts. Now, one of the units that went in 2003 was detailed to attend the suspected site of the tomb of King Gilgamesh. Or why would that be significant, somebody might ask? What's so important about that tomb? Well, first of all, Gilgamesh is the subject of the most ancient story we know in human history, the Epic of Gilgamesh. And Gilgamesh wasn't an ordinary guy according to the story. Now, when you read the stories from that part of the world, and that's where the Akkadian, Babylonian, Syrian, Sumerian stories, we're talking about that part of the world. When you read those stories, we are told that governance over human society began with sky people governing human beings. So our original leaders weren't human. They were from somewhere else. They colonized the planet for whatever reason, and they managed us as the local population and as their workforce. And at a later stage, they handed governance over to human leaders. Now, that story repeats all around the world. If you go to southern Nigeria and Benin, they will tell you the story of the Ojiso and the Oba. And the Ojiso are the original rulers, and they came from the sky. They came from the stars. And then they handed over to the human leaders, the Oba. You've got it in the Bible as well, where originally you've got the people of God governed by this entity who is called Yahweh, or these entities who are called the powerful ones. And then there's a crossover king, King Saul, the first human king. Well, King Gilgamesh is the crossover king in the Mesopotamian story. Only he's a crossover in more than one way. Now, in those stories, we are all hybrids. We are all earthlings with a little bit of sky people spliced into us. Well, Gilgamesh was a little bit more sky people than the rest of us. And so wouldn't it be interesting if we found his tomb? Wouldn't it be interesting if we could analyze it? Wow, what if we could even DNA test what was in there and just see if there was anything unusual about that? And so that's why it was that in 2003, Jörg Fassbinder of the University of Bavaria, I can't remember the university now, but I remember seeing him on the BBC, so excited that they had found the probable site of Gilgamesh's tomb. Within a couple of weeks of the Allied forces going into Iraq, there were units there to retrieve what's there, and then the whole story.
I remember that.
Dead, and it's been dead for 18 years since. The official story is they decided not to investigate further. They decided to cover the site up. But the people I've been talking with have said there have been a number of missions like that that didn't come to a dead end, where things were retrieved, were taken away, were analyzed, and they were not done so publicly. And it may be that they all touched upon this most ancient narrative explaining who we are, where we came from, and if there is an ET aspect to that story. Wouldn't it be interesting to settle that question once and for all? Wouldn't it be interesting to know if the Epic of Gilgamesh is pure fiction or if it's telling us the truth about the origin of the human race? Wouldn't it be worth investigating? Well, my suspicion is it was investigated, but the after effect of going into a war where you are laying your life on the line and you think you're doing it to save people, to save the Kurds, or you think you're doing it to save freedom, to get rid of weapons of mass destruction and save the world. You're doing it because you're fighting for your country. And then you get there and you find none of that's going to apply to you. You're there for other reasons and you don't really understand what they are. And this is part of a bigger story that you're never going to be told about. That's quite a traumatizing thing to happen to anybody. And if you come away from that and you've spoken to your chaplain, where'd you go then? Who'd you talk to after that? And that's the situation I found many people to have been in after that particular incursion. And it's not just there. There are other stories like that where there's far more going on and our governments are far more interested in these ancient sites than ever they talk about publicly. And the removal and destruction of ancient heritage is a very widespread and ongoing thing. Where I live in Canberra, it's happening right now, where the government is wanting to turn this ancient Aboriginal site that has hard copy of their tradition of knowledge, they want to turn that into townhouses. last year,
Of
Rio
course.
Tinto blew up a site that was a site that could demonstrate continuous human occupation prior to the last ice age. And so they blew that up because it's only Aboriginal culture. Well, this is history that we're getting rid of because it's not part of the mainstream story, not important to us. It happens all around the world. But I think when you've actually risked your life for the sake of something that you're never going to be told about, that's a really traumatizing experience. And I feel a lot of compassion for people who are in that situation.
Well, we had Dr. Heather Lynn on, who's an archaeologist, and we talked about this. She witnessed this firsthand. She's been in the field to see that during our occupation in Iraq, that these dealings were going on, that they were recovering items that some of them were private, like private military security being sent in to do it for very rich, wealthy people to get it, and some of it was our military going in to get it.
Yes.
It wasn't just collecting, though. It's like you said. I believe they're trying to cover up because the evidence of alien presence here on Earth is right there in the ancient past. And
yes, it is. In particular, in that part of the world.
Yeah, in Iran. We're talking Samaria and ancient Babylon. That's it. If it's going to be somewhere, it's going to be there. I totally need to pick your brain at some other time off air. I need help, and you might be the person to help me. Yes, because this is where my idea is for my story, and something I've been fascinated with. That's why my ears perked up with the when you mentioned this and the soldiers, because I've been fascinated by the Kandahar story. I was fascinated back in 2003 when we were going in Iran. I'm like, ooh, what are we going to find? We're probably never going to hear. I had a feeling this was going on because I knew the ancient history and the ancient alien knowledge is right there in Iraq and Iran. It's all there. But the problem is regimes and religions that stand in the way.
What I'd love to know is what ancient technology may we have retrieved from some of these places.
Ancient technology? Oh yeah. I mean, they could have an ancient UFO buried somewhere. They could have, the Ark of the Covenant. Just recently, I just read an article because it's in Ethiopia. They have the there's a building there that they believe the Ark of the Covenant. There's priests that protect it. You know what I'm talking about? They just had 700 people murdered by another regime there, protecting it. They were just to protect that. 700 people died in that village protecting that. Just now, that happened recently, modern times.
Yep, I do. This is a phenomenon I talk about in The Scars of Eden, that through our history, you can sometimes track where a story is being protected, unfortunately, by either a lot of killing or a lot of apparent suicides.
Oh, yeah.
And where I grew up in the UK, in the 1980s, there was a very bizarre sequence of suicides that occurred around the, what was it called? Ronald Reagan's SDI. The Space Defense Initiative.
Oh, yeah, the Star Wars program.
Wars. And it was so obviously not a sequence of suicides that there were very significant public figures calling for a government inquiry to expose what was going on. And the government of the day, Margaret Thatcher's government, said there was no need for that because we just knew it was an unfortunate sequence of coincidences. Well, sometimes an unfortunate sequence of coincidences is the red flag that tells you that there's a story being covered up here.
Sorry, I had to mute because I'm trying to fix another phone line. I jinxed myself. I got a phone line that's messing up on me. But we have somebody else on a phone line that's holding right now. I want to take this call while I try to fix the other line. We got Zach on the line. How you doing tonight, Zach?
I'm doing pretty good, brother. Not liking that Tom Brady won the Super Bowl today. But,
I don't care about the NFL. I'm here. I'm doing Paranormal Soup. I don't care about the NFL.
There was a game for that? Right.
There was a game? What's the Super Bowl? Anyways, thanks for calling in, Zach.
Yeah, I just have two questions, but I'll keep them nice and short. Hey, Paul, good to hear from you, man. So,
hi, Zach.
My first My first question piggybacks off of a comment that you made saying that a lot of veterans that you have gotten stories from, basically they were, when they got over to the location where they're at, they were used more as, staff on an archaeological expedition or whatever it might be. So my question to you is there some truth to the alleged stories that came out that when U.S. soldiers originally invaded Afghanistan, they came across these giant-sized beings?
Yeah.
Why or why not?
Yeah, I've heard some accounts of that. I've heard some people seeking to debunk those accounts. And the side I take is I believe the people who brought those stories. I think you just have to stop and think about the kind of personality profile of a U.S. soldier to know you are not going to get silly, fanciful stories coming out of that culture. Certainly where people were fighting in Afghanistan, you've got some very difficult, challenging, frightening territory to work in, but that doesn't produce that kind of story. And having listened to those who brought those reports, I would take that seriously. And I think as soon as you've opened your mind to the possibility that there might be other presences on this planet that are not part of our public story, there's no worldview problem to accepting that account. I think, to be fair, the only reason you would be skeptical about the story is because of worldview assumptions. But if you just start with an open mind and you consider the credibility of the people who are bringing the report, I think that takes you to saying, oh my goodness, what happened there? Where did that come from? And that would be my response.
Okay. And then my second question piggybacks off of something that Jason had said earlier about a possible alien Me Too movement. And really, when I think about it, it's eventually it will come out, whether it's tomorrow or whether it's thousands of years down the road, then eventually, the human race will eventually come into contact with beings that are not of this planet. My question to you is, based on the research that you've gathered and all that, how would you see the reaction of extraterrestrial life coming into really mainstream norm? And is there going to be a possible Me Too alien movement that'll come from that? And how do you really see that happening?
Yes, what would the reaction be? I think that because that's a difficult question to answer, I think because of that, we're unlikely to see a big single disclosure moment.
Right.
I think that there is always a drip, drip, drip of disclosure happening. And sometimes it's just from the experiences. I do think that we are seeing a semi-official drip, drip, drip at the moment. And that might be sort of insurance against a bigger disclosure coming from somewhere else.
Yep.
A disclosure the government can't control. And what I find interesting about the current announcements is that the people making them are sort of 1 degree removed from authority. They're 1 degree removed from the person in authority making a formal announcement. So we've got the former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Presidents George W. Bush and Clinton. We've got the former head of French intelligence, Alain Juillet. We've got the former head of Israel's space security program, Hayam Eshed. We've got the former Canadian Minister of Defense, Paul Hellyer, etc., all making these statements about off-world vehicles not made on this earth, metamaterials being examined, so on and so forth. I think that's pretty close. And I think that these things are out there kind of as an insurance against, oh my goodness, something has happened that we now can't deny. And I think if that drip, drip, drip goes on long enough, then if a moment came where there had to be an announcement from the president, it would be at the point where 70% of us would say, yes, I think we'd already worked that out. Thank you very much. And I think that's what they're hoping for, that the drip, drip, drip will get enough people to a place where they're not shocked, that there isn't that sudden shock horror, oh my goodness, we've been lied to kind of reaction.
But they'll just be like, well, we did tell you. We
told you this. You know,
I think that's what NASA's been doing. I think NASA's been doing that with the photos they let out. I'm like, oh, if they're covering up, why did they let that photo out? You know, I think it's their way of secretly slipping it in and say, well, we weren't hiding anything. We knew as much as you did.
I think that's right. And that's why a decade ago we had the Roman Catholic Church saying there's no theological issue if we suddenly have contact with another civilization. And I think they did that kind of as an insurance against the Chinese saying, oh, we went to the moon and we met some people there, or something like that, something they couldn't control. So I do think there's this gradual, but it's always a combination, a bit like Jason was saying earlier, it's always a combination of disclosure and non-disclosure. Kind of together, so that it's not in your face. I mean, I found it really interesting when in 2017, the New York Times, ran with the USS Nimitz story, the Tic Tac encounters, and okay, well, it's in the paper. Is it true? Oh, all right, okay. So the Navy are talking about it. That's interesting. Oh, now the Pentagon has confirmed it 2 years later. And to my amazement, there's virtually no reaction. There's no reaction to that because this is an incredible disclosure that we've had a unit in place for 70 years to investigate UFO encounters. We engage with them. We investigate their crash. Why aren't we all talking about this? And the fact that that got announced and there was hardly any reaction is probably very reassuring to our governments that the drip is working. That people are not shocked, sensationalized by it, and that when it finally comes out that we've been in contact at a government level for decades and decades, people will say, yeah, wasn't that announced a couple of years ago? You know?
Yep, exactly.
And you get away from all the political fallout that would come if instead it was a big announcement.
Well, thank you, Zach, for calling in, bud.
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Zach.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Paul, for answering my questions. And that would actually be very interesting if Joe Biden had to be the one to announce that extraterrestrial life exists. I can only imagine how that would happen. Anyway, guys, you have a good night.
You too, Thanks, Zach. Well, that's the thing. You know, it is a wonderful test. They release this information. Minds didn't go, you know, I'm here going, why is anybody not caring about this? This is what I've been talking about for years, and here they are finally admitting something a little bit. You know, imagine, like you said, imagine that they made that same kind of announcements, like the New York Times ran that in the 80s or in the 70s or in the 60s. Imagine the reaction then. It would not be ignored. It'd be the top news story. Everybody would be talking about it. And people be losing their minds. But now we got so much else to be offended by and disagree with and yell at each other about the stupidest things in the world. And we're like, oh, aliens, yeah, whatever. I'm talking about this, you know?
Yes.
Yeah, it's sad. It's so sad.
It's true.
I'm ashamed for the human race. I said this back in 2017 when no one cared, that I was ashamed for us, that nobody cares.
Well, there's another side to it, just to encourage you, Jason, because I absolutely share your feeling and how frustrating it's been for there to have been such big news on this theme in the news at a time when everyone's distracted by the health crisis, so on and so forth. But at the same time, because of all the lockdowns that we've had over the last year, a lot more people have been spending a lot more time on YouTube than before and exploring their curiosity in a way they might not have had the opportunity to before. And I've spoken to a lot of people that is their story. Suddenly they were at home, they could spend time on YouTube, they could indulge in questions, and step by step, or now they're on my channel and now their world has been blown apart, and can we talk about it?
Especially for abductees. I think for somebody to realize that something's going on, they have to stop with their everyday life and routine to sit back and self-reflect and go, wait a second, what was that experience I had? You know, I mean, that if coronavirus did anything during lockdown time, they made a lot of people stop and reflect and think about things. And they might have had some people have realizations that, oh yeah, something weird's been going on.
Yes. I think so. I think that's true.
You know, what scares me is that they take the sign of non-shock from the public to, you know, basically, this is the little disclosure we got. They got their little insurance policy. What I said back in 2017 is like, if they're disclosing this now, what is it that they know might be coming?
Yeah,
that
what
they
is it
can't
they're
control.
not saying?
Right. It's what they're not saying that worries me. What is coming that they can't control, that they have to put this insurance policy down and like, well, we gave you what information we knew. We knew a little bit, but here's what, you know, we kind of told you, you know, what is it that they're fearful of?
I think that's right, because I think the policy of non-disclosure, you know, it's easy to get frustrated and angry with our governments for being silent about these things, but it's very possible that that policy of non-disclosure comes from an ET origin, not from our governments.
Right.
You know, we're playing ball with some other powers here. And if the non-disclosure agreement is among various ET factions, and I believe that's the story the Bible tells, I believe that's the story the Sumerian texts tell, and all these other cultures around the world repeat the same idea, different ET factions with different agendas, different ideas for Project Earth and Project Humanity. There's some kind of uneasy truce that they're in an agreement of self-disclosure. And so when I see an acceleration of disclosure, I'm thinking, whoa, is there a little bit of instability?
Right. That's what I was
going
saying.
on right now? Who's pulling away? Is it the good guys or the bad guys? Where is this headed?
Is there a secret war going on? I've always wondered too. But you know, I mean, you mentioned I can't say his name, general from the Israeli space program, the Intergalactic Federation.
Yep.
I've always said, what if there's a prime directive that that we're dealing with here, that they can't? They have their own set of rules of why they cannot, until we reach a certain stage, be open about their contact with us here.
I think that's right. I think the prime directive of Star Trek is a fictionalized version of something real to do with our place in the universe and how our visitors interact with us. I do think there is a non-disclosure agreement in place, but it's not watertight, and it's certainly not watertight at the moment. And as I say, it's the possibility there's some instability there that does raise an eyebrow. If our safety in this scenario rested purely in the hands of our political leaders, I would be terrified.
Right.
But I am somewhat reassured that there is a spectrum of presences around us, and that some of them are, to put it crudely, are gunning for us and are on our side and have a nurturing relationship towards us. And I think my hope for a sensible outcome is probably vested more there than in what some of our politicians might bring to the conversation.
I think they've left the politicians out of it. Honestly.
Well, they have, because there are layers of top secrecy. I think there are 17 layers of top secret above the US president, for instance.
Right.
So these discussions are happening at a very covert level, which was essentially what Hayam Eshed, Brigadier General from Israel, was talking about. It's frustrating because, you know, you and I have grown up believing we live in democracies, and we'd like to feel a bit more involved in that. But, you know, whether we really want President Trump or President Biden or Prime Minister Scott Morrison to be the ones,
I don't,
you know, having these conversations, maybe it's better that it's happening at these other levels.
Yeah, take us to your leader. Like, no, you don't want to do that.
No, don't. No.
You don't want to go there. Just talk to us, the people. You don't want to go to our leaders. They're messed up. You know, well, that's the thing. I've always believed, like, I think the evidence of that was back during the Clinton administration. I think the Clintons have a lot of ties, a lot of intelligence ties. They're, you know, especially when he got into presidency, he got a lot of ties within the DOJ, FBI. They got a lot of little spider webs out there, and they got their connections. But the one connection they didn't have, what happened at Roswell? What is Area 51? They did not know.
No.
They are people that want information. That's politics has a lot of power and information. And what did they try to do? Clinton sent a number of people out to try to find these answers. He's not the only president. I mean, Jimmy Carter did the same. And it seemed like he got shot down by George Bush when he was director of CIA. We've seen a lot of evidence when it comes to the presidents, and really being with like Carter, starting there because he made a promise to reveal it, and then he got shut down. And then Clinton, looking at these people, politics is information is power, and that's what these people want. They can't get it.
Yes, I mean, it does say something, doesn't it? If your president requests information on this and some official says, sorry, sir, that's a need to know.
And you don't need to know. That's exactly what George Bush told Jimmy Carter. From the unofficial channels, that's what we've been told. That's what George Bush, when he was director of CIA, told Jimmy Carter, is like, it's a need to know, and you don't need to know. And you're president of the United States. You think you might need to know.
From a Democratic angle, it's frustrating, but part of me is reassured.
Right? Exactly. Yeah. There's some of these, I'm not a fan. I hate all politicians. So I don't want any of them to know. I don't want any in charge of that. Not at all. Not at all. But, there could be reasons. I mean, people say JFK was assassinated because he did know. They did tell him, and he was going to tell everyone, and then that's why they took him out. I don't know. I mean, these conspiracy theories have been going on for a long time. We won't know the truth. I don't think it's going to be revealed in a Freedom of Information Act.
No, and that may have been part of the story. And certainly, the history of the CIA is connected with the history of non-disclosure of the UFO phenomenon and ET contact. And the apparatus for setting up the CIA and the apparatus for suppressing ET contact was done in the same bill, the National Security Act of 1947, President Truman. That's right. So there's a very profound connection there.
Yeah, and I also, I've always talked about as Eisenhower, I think gave us the warning when he left office, and everybody heard him talking about the military-industrial complex. But I think what he's trying to tell people is something he couldn't talk about was the fact that, I think the end of us having control as a U.S. government and presidents knowing ended with Eisenhower, maybe ended with Kennedy. But Eisenhower was trying to warn us that it was going to end, that this is going off into private hands, out of our reach.
Oh, that's exactly right. President Woodrow Wilson gave a very similar grave warning about where power really resides, and it's not where you think it does.
Exactly.
And as you were saying earlier, when you go to war, suddenly you find there are all these private contractors involved who seem to have as much clout as your national army, and where have they come from, and who are they acting for, and in whose interests? So yes, it's a very bewildering and messy picture sometimes.
And then they give money to the politicians, and the politicians get in office, they give them a contract, and it's an evil cycle continues. Right now there's a legislature happening in Nevada where they're trying to give tech companies or corporations the ability to create their own government and own land. That's a great idea. Sure, that'll work out great. But why? Yeah. Why? Because whatever politician's lobbying for this, I'm sure got a bunch of money from some tech corporation that wants this to happen. And it's dangerous territory. And that's where I feel this is all at. This is all this stuff. The U.S. government lost control of it a long time ago when they couldn't, because you can't put it on any kind of official government program or secret program because it's still documented, and the Congress, the Senate can look into it. It has to be off the books. It has to go to somebody else who can't be looked at by Congress. And that's where we got into trouble. That's
exactly right. And I must say, when I was doing my research for the Scars of Eden and looking at where did these ancient stories come from and where did they go, it all ties in with the history of corporations, nation states, empires, and this little thread of elites gathering control of resources, gathering control of the news, gathering control of people's beliefs. It's a very interesting thread, and you can go to any part of the world and you can find that thread weaving through. And it's just amazing how connected it is with the big, big stories of what's the universe we live in, who are we, where did we come from, and who tells us what the answer to those questions are.
Well, that's the thing. If the government did come out and totally said, it's all real, they're aliens, they're here now, I don't know if I'd trust it. because that's where we're at. We don't trust the media. We don't trust the government. Everything's an illusion. I don't know if I'd trust a disclosure. I hopefully have. Last week we couldn't get her on. I'm hoping we got her now. Is Dee on the line?
That's where we're at. We don't trust them.
Oh.
Yes, it's Steve.
All right. Make sure you got the live stream off while we're on the phone. How you doing, Dee? I'm so glad you're able to call in tonight.
Thank you. I think my tablet is like behind. I heard a question. You know when the astronauts are out in space and when they return down back to the Earth, how come we're not told of what they see in space?
Do you mean like we're not, that they're covering up what they're seeing in space? I mean, a lot of astronauts have come out over the years to talk about oddity things they've seen in space. Edgar Mitchell, being one.
Well,
Buzz Aldrin.
It is interesting, Dee, because...
But we're not, they don't tell us, if they've seen any UFOs or anything, on the news or anything, because I don't hear anything.
Well, yeah, it's not going to be on the news, but go ahead. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, Dee, it is interesting because in the Scars of Eden, I actually list some astronauts, Mercury astronauts and Apollo astronauts, who have said some very interesting things about things they have seen. And I think as the years have gone by, there's been a little bit more freedom as to what they're allowed to say, but they are all bound by layers and layers and layers of official secrets laws. And when you look at, say, someone like Ed Mitchell, what he was able to say, even while bound by all those layers of official secrets laws, you realize there must be some other stories there. And he was asked one time what NASA's view was of the UFO phenomenon. And his answer is very interesting. He said, well, officially, NASA doesn't have a view on it because that's not its mission. If you can just follow the logic, it doesn't have a view because that's not its mission. In other words, it knows stuff, but it's not going to talk about it. And that applies to all the personnel who are involved in NASA and other space agencies. They're bound by layers of official secrets laws. From time to time, you will hear some of them saying, we saw this. We've heard that from Buzz Aldrin, for instance, about the mission to the moon, what the things that they saw. But then you'll also pick up there are things they're not allowed to say. It'll be quite clear when you listen closely. And from time to time, we've heard from people who've been up in the International Space Station who've seen things and they have talked about it. And then they've gone on camera again to say, oh, I worked out it wasn't a UFO after all.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think...
Frozen P was the latest
one. I think I believe the first version of your story and not the second. So I would say to you, if you listen constantly and closely enough, they are saying some things, but by law, there's heaps they're just not allowed to say.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much.
Dee, I tell you, do you remember Carl Sagan?
Oh, yes.
Excuse me?
Carl Sagan was a really significant astrophysicist, cosmologist, and his public position, because he was an academic, his public position was pure science, and he would never put his neck out and say, oh, I think there are ETs, I think we are in contact. He was always an agnostic. We haven't seen any evidence, therefore I don't believe it. In private, he was the guy who told the Apollo astronauts what the code word was to use if they had an ET encounter.
Santa Claus, if I remember right.
So Santa Claus was on the first mission, and I think grandmother was Ed Mitchell's mission. And so you've got to realize that sometimes these people will have a public position and a private position. And even though that's frustrating, we have to understand they are bound by law to have those two positions. And sometimes you got to read between the lines a little bit to realize what they're telling you.
Oh, wow.
Well, thank you.
This is very interesting.
It is. Go read Contact by Carl Sagan, one of my all-time favorite novels. I was just talking with a Facebook friend about that movie. The best scene is when you want to take a ride. That's the best scene, the best part of the movie right there, and the book. Thank you so much for calling.
Thanks, Dee. Great question.
You're welcome. Thank you. And I really, 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 really enjoyed your posts and this group on Sunday, Jason. You guys are like family to me.
Oh, thank you. You guys, that's what I love about the chat room. Everybody is so supportive of each other. You have a great night, Dee.
Oh, you too. Thank you. And be careful out there because it's supposed to snow this week.
Oh, yeah,
And
I know.
I'm praying on my big blizzards to come.
It needs either need the snow or go home. Like, shut everything down and let me have a snow day, or don't snow at all. That's what I say. Thanks, Dee. You have a great night.
You too,
Jason.
Casey. Good night.
Bye, Dee. Jason, I was going to say that's great to hear, you know, the importance of having a safe space like you've created where people can have conversations, even if all they want to do is ask a question, or at best if they're wanting to share their own belief or their own experience. This is what we need.
Exactly. We have to have a place. That's like I said, the beauty of the internet is it does give people groups, places they can go and be able to talk about these things. And then you have, I remember Terry Lovelace wrote Incident at Devil's Den, and then he got all these emails from people that read the book and like, this happened to me. And I had that experience. His book opened my eyes to my own experiences. And that's what happens as more people share their experiences, it connects the dots for others. And we realize something's going on. What I love about both your books is, like I said, to me, the proof has always been there in front of us. It's in all of our ancient stories. It's in so many different ways. You can see it. Once you go down this rabbit hole, once you start to see it, you start seeing the connections everywhere. Whenever you hear an ancient story or mythology, like, oh yeah, it must be. You start doing the meme of the must be aliens for ancient aliens. Is what I feel like every time. But for me, I've been that way for a long time. Now I see it with a lot more people, and it's a lot more. We definitely have a different perspective compared to like 20, 30 years ago.
Definitely. And it is, for me, seeing those connections around the world, from culture to culture, from age to age, that was, for me, the thing that began building and building, and it makes it overwhelming. It makes it a narrative that it's impossible to ignore, and you can't go back to seeing it the old way once you've joined those dots and the picture has emerged.
Well, that's the thing. The talk about you can't go back. That we always used to say, in this field, that if you release one thing, you admit to one thing, if the government admits to one thing, that starts a snowball effect.
Yeah.
I think back in the day that was completely true. That snowball would roll really fast because people would be so shocked by an admittance. Now we're at a point that snowball is going to take a long time to roll downhill because people are just not shocked by this stuff anymore.
Sure.
So I don't know. Like I said, if they're planning any full disclosure, I have my doubts. I really don't think they are. I think it's an insurance policy is what I think. We got another call.
I share that view. I share your view.
We got another caller on the line here I want to get to before our next commercial break. We got Marcus on the line. How you doing tonight, Marcus?
I'm doing well. How are you, sir?
Doing good. Thanks for calling in.
Thank you. I want to go off track a little bit here, but it's still related. I got word along with your fans that Heather Wade is going off the air or has gone at this point, and I am very upset about this. But one of the things I can't help think impelled her to the separation would have been the immense pressure she brought upon herself by delving into the paranormal, UFOs, explorers, and writers about the whole field of people involved in that pursuit. And if you're right, and if there are agents and people and organizations devoted to suppressing all discussion or news or knowledge of that, I'm sure that had a great deal to do with driving Heather off the air. And
some people wondered if that would drove. Some people wonder, Marcus, if that's what got Art Bell driven off air because of all the drama that went down when he tried to come back. And I wonder about that to this day. I didn't want to talk about Heather Wade leaving because it hurts too much, and I have my hopes that maybe something will change. So I'm not ready to admit it. So I know it's off topics, but yeah, I'm praying for the best. Tomorrow's her birthday, and I'm like, oh, do I call her? I know I just hope for the best. I really don't want her to go. I just hope something changes. But anyways, yes, I think, there could be pressure out there, governmental pressure to stop people from talking about it. But I think that's a little more behind us now. I don't think they worry about that so much. What's your thoughts, Paul?
Let me ask, do you think that humanity will ever be told the final down and dirty as to what the truth really is, ever?
Yes, well, I think what's happening is that the information is being allowed out without the level of violent attack, death threats that belonged in previous times. So, for instance, when Roswell happened in 1947, the U.S., we now know, the U.S. military did put gag orders on the local population with death threats that were multi-generational death threats. And there came a time, it was only in the 1970s, I think, that a number of those families had reached a point where they weren't frightened of those death threats anymore, and the culture began to shift. More people are allowed to say more things without a threat of violence, or even without being distanced or let go or vilified or any kind of official debunking happening. So when I look at what happened to Prime Minister Medvedev, the previous Russian Prime Minister, when he spoke about contact, President Putin didn't come on and debunk him. And then when we had senior Roman Catholic scholars saying there's no theological problem with our having contact with other civilizations, the Pope didn't come out and correct them. Haim Eshed has spoken, and Benjamin Netanyahu hasn't come out and contradicted him. And so I think the information is going out there. People are allowed to put it in books. They're allowed to broadcast about it, and they're not shut down. I think where people are getting shut down at the moment is when they are offending certain corporations. And that's a different story. I think if you start threatening the profits and the inscrutability of certain corporations, you'll be taken off YouTube or whatever. But I think you can talk about ET contact and an ET presence without necessarily being taken off the air these days. I think it's more those business interests, I think, that are beginning to call the shots rather than a policy of total silence on cosmic questions.
Fingers crossed we'll know it before we die.
Yes.
But you might not like that wish if it's granted. I'm saying.
Well, I figure I'm old. I'm heart attack survivor. What the heck? I would like to know the truth. So
yeah,
I don't blame you.
I agree, Marcus, and it would be nice to hear it acknowledged. I do agree.
Yes.
Thank you, Marcus, for calling in, bud.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
You too, all of you.
Thank you.
That's the thing, though. It's, it depends on what the revelation is. I've always said the reason they may not be able to reveal things is they don't understand it themselves and it's too complicated.
What would they say? What would they say? And especially if we're not calling the shots. I mean, is that really an announcement you're going to make? I don't think so.
Right, exactly. Then they lose their power.
Yeah,
they lose their power. We'll talk about. I was talking to my wife about this. About what I fear isn't. I'm a big I call out China and the communist government of China and the stuff they pull. But I told my wife the other day, it's like, I don't know if you can even fear that anymore. I fear technocracy, like these corporations taking over and ruling things, especially when you hear them trying to get their own legal government of, have their own like government and stuff like that they're trying to do. I mean, I fear, the Orwellian technocracy, where it seems like we have this veil of democracy, like we feel like we have democracy, but in truth we have nothing because we're completely controlled by this technocracy, basically.
Definitely. Power has definitely shifted away from our parliaments, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's happened in very structural and official ways. In Australia, we have actually signed agreements to say that corporations have more authority here than our own federal government.
Right.
And on that basis, those corporations can sue the Australian government if we make policy changes that reduce their profitability.
Exactly.
Well, at the moment we signed that, well, I'm not living in a democracy anymore. I would love to see greater democratization. And again, I think if we can just get more grassroots conversation happening and grassroots initiative, I think that's a great thing. It can be very disempowering when we talk about these things, and especially when we start talking about ET demographics calling the shots, because you think, well, how can we change that? And I think, to be honest, what it really comes back to is, okay, that's the situation. How do you and I then thrive in this bizarre world? How do we live a life that is exciting, exploratory, healthy, fun, where we're actually learning stuff and living a meaningful life in this world as it is? Because I think that you can't really get to that question while you're living in an illusion.
That's
But I
exactly
think
right.
if you come out of the illusion and then think that you can change the situation so that we're no longer having to converse with ET neighbors, well, I think you're barking up the wrong tree. We have to learn how to live happy on this planet. And I think the way we talk to one another is going to be a big part of how we do that and to what extent we can.
The other thing you have to realize, too, when you talk about corporations and money, well, if you have an ET race here with this super technology of traveling across galaxies and, probably cold fusion energy, like they got it all. They got the Trek, the Star Trek gadgets. Well, that would destroy a whole economy and energy sector.
Oh, exactly. I mean, this was Ed Mitchell's big thing.
Yeah.
That one of the reasons, there were two things that really drove him to campaign for government declassification of UFO files. One was because he wanted to honor his townspeople who had been shushed and silenced. And the other was that he believed that we have available right now free energy, 0 point energy, energy from the creative source of the universe, infinite energy. And if that's the case, then we don't need to be fighting oil wars. We don't need to be having energy crises, or in Australia, people unable to pay for their own home because they can't afford the utility bills. It's just absurd that we should be putting people through that stress if we have free energy available. And for him, that was one of the big therefores of acknowledging the reality of what is actually going on.
That's what I've said is a big reason. We got to go to our last commercial break, but when we come back, we're going to continue this conversation. I mean, just think about Tesla. I mean, he was trying to do free energy, no wires and all that, and look how he got shot down. It's not, free energy, they can't make money, That's what I'm saying. If we get the Trek, the gadgets the aliens have, that would change everything. You could be out of a job if you work in the oil industry. You might not be for alien technology. I mean, took our jobs. There are people saying it could change the world. There's a lot of reasons why this could be being kept secret. We can name a number of them. Will that truth be revealed? I don't know. I really don't know, but I feel like something's coming. We'll talk about that when we come back from the short commercial break, and the phone lines are still open, guys. You can go ahead and call in after this commercial break.
Intercepted the transmission of unknown origin.
Transmission? Out here?
SOS.
Human.
Unknown.
Alien. Certificate X. Exclusive engagement at the Odeon Leicester Square. Now.
Any systematized transmission indicating a possible intelligent origin must be investigated. I will hear it.
In space, no one can hear you scream.
If you are interested in discovering the truth about the paranormal and want to hear from leading researchers in the field, join Justin Brown on his 3 weekly shows named My Paranormal Soapbox, Necromancer Live Show, and the Supernatural Symposium, live on Facebook, YouTube, and InterfaceDeath.net.
This is an APAC studio presentation.
Hi, I'm Barry, owner-operator of Barry's Barometer Barn. Lately, I bet you've been lying awake at night asking yourself, how many barometers do I really need? Well, at Barry's Barometer Barn, we think you need more than one. Otherwise, we're gonna go out of business. Remember, at Barry's Barometer Barn, we don't know the meaning of high-pressure sales. Come on, folks, buy another barometer. I'm trying to put my kids through college, I've got a family to support, and a secret mistress who isn't cheap.
Visit Barry's Barometer Barn, 000 Storm Drive. Come on, folks, buy a barometer. I'm Barry's older brother, Larry, and every time one of you people walk past the store without coming in, Barry beats me.
This has been a presentation from Tim Morgan's APAC Studio. For more almost professional amateur comic studio content, visit the APAC YouTube channel. Search APAC 2002. That's APAC 2002 on YouTube.
When Alex Gardner is asleep, he has an extraordinary gift. The government wants it, the scientists want it, but to keep it may cost him his life. It might be better if Alex didn't sleep at all, but he cannot resist entering the dreamscape. Can you? See Dreamscape in the West End and all over London now, Certificate 15. It takes an extraordinary adventurer to enter the dreamscape.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from Talkstream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
Join us every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time for Weird Wednesday, the live stream, with your hosts Jamie, the Living Dead Girl, and Rob, the Phantom, where we'll talk about all things paranormal, including zodiac, astrology, tarot card and oracle card readings, live ghost boxing and spirit communication, where we'll do Voices from Beyond, the Cold Case Files. So we hope you join us live on Facebook and YouTube every Wednesday night at midnight Eastern Standard Time. We hope to see you there. Bye-bye.
The night is alive. Join us and take a walk on the weird side when you tune in to the Kingdom of Nye, hosted by Heather Wade, the finest in late night talk. Listen live free weeknights starting at 9 p.m. Pacific time at thekingdomofnye.com, talkstreamlive.com, and the Paranormal Radio app. Wanna take a ride?
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Heat 'em up. Do, re,
You're listening to Paranormal Soup, bringing you the weird every Sunday night. Call into the show and join the discussion. The call-in lines are 219-230-4444 or 260-225-9419 or by Skype caller ID Jblandoo or Jblandparanormalsoup. And now to your host, Jason Bland.
Tonight we're talking to guest Paul Anthony Wallis, author of Escaping from Eden and his newest book, The Scars of Eden, the sequel to Escaping from Eden. I love this subject. It's definitely up there in my top number one subjects to talk about is ancient aliens, our past, when it relates to the biblical stories, other ancient culture stories. To me, this is the real history, the archaeology that should have happened, but it's been censored. We've had a lot of guests on this, covered parts of this subject, how it's been censored throughout the ages. Heather Lynn was a great guest, and when it comes to archaeology, how universities have tried to keep the subject hidden or ignored it completely. When you get into alien abduction with Terry Lovelace, Aaron Montgomery, their stories were very personal, hard to tell. All these pieces are out there. It'll come together one day. I don't believe from the government. It will come together from us finally having enough, and enough people coming out and saying, yes, this happened to me. Or can't you see what the story is in the Bible, what it really means? I think more and more people every day are coming to this realization, and the real disclosure will happen from us demanding it. Really, that we've had enough. We can see through the BS. That's what it is. If you can see through the BS or you want to join this conversation and talk about your own experience, the phone lines are open. Call in. Last half hour of the show, I will take your call. But let's go ahead and get back to our guest. I was told recently that my lack of my distrust of the government's cult-like. It was like, cult-like. I think they've given me plenty of reasons over the years not to trust the government or any other government out there either. And that's the thing. Maybe what they know coming down the road is, okay, American government decides we want to keep it secret. England, UK, they decide to keep it secret. What's to stop Russia or China or some other country that has the information or down south or saying, you know what, we're going to be the first ones to come out and say it's real, people.
Yeah, well, there's certainly a spectrum when it comes to official attitudes to this. And I do think, for instance, in Russia, there is more information that has been spoken by authorities there. I find that rather interesting. If you go to Chile, it is far more a mainstream thing, and you can listen to senior politicians in that country talking openly about the UFO phenomenon as a real thing, as an extraterrestrial thing. So not every country takes the same attitude. And in terms of government non-disclosure, well, America's been pretty strong on that. There's been a big movement towards the declassification of UFO files over the last decade or so. And America's been at the tail end of that process. So there is a bit of a spectrum, and there are different views, according to cultures around the world. And the ancient stories are sometimes nearer the surface in some countries than others. If you go to Ireland, those ancient stories are nearer the surface, as I found through my own parents-in-law. If you go to Ghana, those ancient stories are nearer the surface. So, it differs according to where you go in the world. And in the Scars of Eden, I go all around the world. I couldn't not do that as I began to realize one thing led to another and led to another. And I just find it interesting that in the past, there have been times when our ancestors spoke far more fully and more openly about our place in the universe, about ET contact, than in the time that you and I have been growing up on planet Earth, for instance. It's funny how that happens.
Isn't it?
But then there are moments when, the power of suppression is extreme. There have been portions of history where, I think of 1600 in Italy, Giordano Bruno burned at the stake for merely suggesting there may be intelligent life on other planets. Well, you don't have to do that too many times to shut people up and to dull the culture down in terms of exploring and thinking. Or, when the Catholic forces went into Central and South America, coming from Portugal and Spain, those peoples in the Andean cultures, those people in Central America, they had long-standing indigenous narratives about our ET roots. Their stories of origins talked about visitors coming and engineering us and all that. And those stories were burned, buried, gotten rid of, the priests executed, and Catholicism came in as a lid on all that thinking to make sure that nobody told those stories anymore or asked those questions. And yet, those stories did survive, and not just locked away in the Vatican libraries, they resurfaced through grassroots disclosure. And the Scars of Eden really is a big call to people to be part of a big grassroots disclosure movement, because that's how I think we're going to move things forward, not by official announcements, but by talking to one another, listening to one another, and listening to some of the old stories as well. It's amazing how many of my friends I talk to who we say we wish we had asked our grandparents more while they were still alive. And I think we could apply that to previous generations as well, generations that knew about these things, talked about these things, and had curated these stories and this knowledge for aeons, for generations, for centuries.
Oh yeah, I mean, just look at the Native American people. There's a number of different tribes that talk about they came from the stars, from people from the stars. We have it right here. I mean, look at Fatima, or what is the event in the early 1900s. Right. Fatima, sorry.
You see, that's a great example of we won't take you to our leader, because there in Fatima there is a close encounter and there is communication going on. Here is a message. Can you take this to the most senior leader on the planet, please? So, innocently, this Roman Catholic girl gets the message through to the Pope. Well, when did Fatima happen? 1964, and it's still locked away. We're not allowed to know.
It's older than that. It was early 1900s, I
Sorry.
thought.
Yeah, absolutely right. 1964, I think, was when it was reopened and re-examined. Because 50 years had gone by. That's right. So
it was really as the beginning of the
50
early 20th
years had
century.
gone by. They reviewed it. No, we're still not going to. And here we are in the 21st century. We still can't hear what the message was. So no, we won't take you to our leaders. That's not a good route.
Yeah, because then we will never find out. We do have another phone call. Hopefully this one works. Who we got is a 010 area code. Who do we got on the line?
Hello, can you hear me?
I hear you.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to make sure it was me. I'm calling from Korea, South Korea.
Oh, that's why it's like it says 010. I've never seen that. South Korea, you're my first. Well, no. Have you called in before? I remember South Korea.
Nope, never have.
First time. My first time. Well, thank you so much for calling in.
Wait. I called the Heather show when you did the ghost box.
That's why you're familiar to me. That's why. Okay.
Is this Alan?
Right.
All right.
This is Alan.
Hi, Alan.
Hi.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Hi. First, Jason, on your story, your novel, Air Force, I don't know about the Army or the Marines, but in the Air Force, when they send you to an assignment and you don't know where you're going to go and you don't know what you're going to do, they call that a green door. And you can actually Google that. Go to Google and Google green door assignment.
I'm writing that down right now.
Green door assignment.
I am writing that down. I am looking that up. Thank you. I know nothing about the military.
Paul.
Hi, Alan.
Paul. Hi, sir. How you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you
going?
going?
The planet.
Cool.
Oh, geez, I just kicked off. Really quick question, sir. End game. What do you think their end game is? Is it like to get us to a certain standard, or okay? Like I have 4%. I did one of those DNA tests, and I found out I have 4% Neanderthal on me. So, thinking that, is it possible that there are people walking that we see on the sidewalk that have like 2%, 3%, 10%, 20% alien, and they might not even know it. And maybe that's their end game, to, try to, we're at this position and they want to move us from point A to point B. Your thoughts, sir?
Oh, Alan, that's really, really interesting. The research that I've done for the Scars of Eden makes me think that the DNA exchange between us and some of our cosmic neighbors might be going more in the other direction. I think some of our visitors are here because they want more of us in them. They want some of our benefits in their gene pool. There may be a demographic here that wants to fine-tune us, and I think, you mentioned, Jason, some of the Native American narratives.
Mm-hmm.
They talk about people from the Pleiades who came here to nurture us, and that echoes what some of the Aboriginal Australian stories are.
Exactly.
So maybe there are demographics like that, Alan, that are interested in developing us further and fine-tuning us a bit more. But most of the stories that I've found curated by our ancestors talk about the story the other way around, where visitors are coming here because they want some of the things human beings have in their gene pool to improve their own gene pool. And I have a feeling that has to do with our capacity for creativity, imagination, emotion, love. I think those things are very attractive to some of our visitors. But when you ask about endgame, unfortunately, I think it's a messy answer, because there are other demographics that our ancestors talk about who are very negative towards humanity, who regard us either as cattle or an inconvenience because they actually want resources the planet has to offer and are not very interested in us at all. So I think there's a bit of a mishmash and a conflict over the end game according to which ET demographic you're going to talk to. And I think the fact that there has been this truce, this council, has been a matter of trying to manage those different expectations. Now, the end game I want to see, and I'm echoing the great Ed Mitchell here, is for humanity to actually have a voice in this conversation, because this is our planet. Thank you very much. And I think we ought to be very concerned that we can sit on that council and have a voice in a conversation that is about our planet. My end game would be towards a sustainable situation where we are not left at the mercy of presences we can't even acknowledge exist. That's the change I'd like to see.
So it's like join the Federation, but not the Klingons.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Or the Romulans.
What? There you go. Actually, sir, that makes sense. Because, again, with my DNA test, I have Viking blood in me, right? And so then I got the little readout, and he said I had, like... okay. Anyways, so it said, like, 1% or 2% American Indian. I'm like, what? American Indian? There's absolutely... my ancestors are from Europe, and the Vikings. So, like, I Googled it, and what came is, like, in 1000 AD, the Vikings decided they need to get more gene pool, more different DNA in their gene pool. So they did a raid in America and kidnapped a bunch of Native Americans and brought them over for brides.
Oh, that's really interesting.
That's probably how I got that Native.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that. Leif Erikson.
It may be, but, I have Viking DNA because I'm part English. And there's Viking DNA all through England.
Oh, yeah.
So if any of your ancestors came from England, they'd probably bring Viking DNA with them as well. But, 1%, that's actually quite a lot when you think about it, because to get 1%, I think you only go back something like great-great-great-great-grandfather, and that's 1%. It's something like that. It's much more recent than you would think. 1% sounds tiny, but it's actually more significant than you would think.
My goodness. Okay, sir. Well, thank you very much, and have a good rest of the show.
Thank you, Alan. All the best to South Korea.
Yeah. Thank you so much for calling in, Alan. First time.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well, the DNA thing, I've always wondered, like you said, is it going the other way? Or they're trying to be more like us? I think that's a big part of it. But I also find interesting the when you talk about like Gilgamesh, if I understood that the story of Gilgamesh, he had to possess a body. They talk about him forming the body or possessing the body. I always wonder if the reason they need to, they're working on these hybrids of that, they're trying to find the perfect vessel for their souls.
Yes, and part of the Gilgamesh story is a quest for immortality as well.
Right.
Or it's read that way. And so, there are lots. It's very interesting, isn't it? What would our neighbors be interested in? What would they want? And it's quite possible that some want to live longer than they do. It's quite possible some want a more robust physicality than they have, because we have that. Some might want the creativity and love that we have. And others might be totally disinterested in all of that, and they just like the taste of us. It really,
if you look back to Sumeria, the Sumeria legends and that, there was the whole aspect that we might have been created to help mine. We were a slave race to start. And then somewhere that ended, how that ended, we went off on our own. Like I always loved Stargate, the movie, they had the portal, and then they had everybody's slaves building the pyramids, and then the aliens portal got shut down somehow. And we went on and developed on our own. But I always wondered if the Sumerians or the Anunnaki were like, they created us as a slave race, and then some federation came in and said, hey, you can't be doing that. Now we got to take care of this mess.
Yes, I think that's very possible. It's very possible they did their mining, got what they wanted, and left. The evidence for prehistoric mining in southern Africa is really compelling. It's interesting on the human timeline, because the evidences suggest we're looking at about 200,000 years ago that these ancient mines were operant. And our ancestors were here at that time, people who looked like you and me, but apparently weren't quite as clever as we are. So clever enough to work in someone else's mine, not clever enough to build a city or to farm. And I find it really intriguing. There is a hint of a reference to that even in the Bible, in the Eden story, because we're told in the Bible, in Genesis, that Eden was conveniently close to some key mineral deposits. And then there's a little phrase saying, and then the Elohim, the powerful ones, put the humans to work. And evidently, not a little light gardening. I think mining is indeed part of the story, and I'm so thankful not the end of our story.
Well, let's hope not. Let's hope they don't show back up. Okay, time to get back to work, people. Time to start mining again. Oh, wait, you got gold. We'll take all that. We've had fascinations with gold.
Yes.
It goes back to all, why did we suddenly get fascinated with gold? Thousands to the beginning of human history. There's got to be a reason.
It's very intriguing. And gold has so many interesting properties, and I've heard lots of different theories, protecting the atmosphere of another planet. But there are properties of gold that have to do with health, people looking for health and longevity, and properties that have to do with its effect on human consciousness. So there's a lot in that. That's probably worth a book in itself.
No kidding. It's you want to call it the
Gold
alchemist
stone
or the alchemist stone. It's the ultimate secret of immortality.
Exactly.
Transmutation.
And, I think the properties of metal apropos consciousness and health, that is, I believe, part of the alchemical tradition.
Now, you mentioned you think that they don't. I find it interesting too. You also said they were trying to gain our capacities for creativity and for love and compassion. And when you talk about that, I think there's some evidence in that in alien abduction cases when people talk about being tested emotionally.
Yes.
Like they're shown images of things just to see what their reaction would be. And that's really
right.
hinted to that.
Well, if you read Harvest by G.L. Davies,
right,
it seems to me that the Susan, who's the person in that story, it's a real case study, that her emotional responses to images and situations are being tested, and that she's being maybe even harvested for her emotional responses, as well as for possible hybridization. So that's a really interesting aspect of Jill Davies' book Harvest. And then listening to other experiences, their response to their children is being studied, and their response to their natural earthly children and their response to any hybrid children that they may have produced is all being tested and examined. So I think that connection we have with one another as family, as human beings, is part of the fascination we hold for some of our visitors. And I hope that's a hopeful thing.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we could be dealing with different factions. You know, there's the Federation that's protecting us, and then there's the Klingons or Romulans or somebody coming in and trying to screw things up or have their own agendas. You know, we don't. That's why I always said if the government knows, it might be so complicated they can't tell us without totally throwing the whole world into complete confusion and panic.
I think it's very possible. I think they prefer we just get down and read some good books on the subject.
But yeah. Well, Carl, you mentioned Carl Sagan. I was talking about it's my favorite book's Contact. And I always felt if there was Majestic 12, it's come up, the idea of scientists that run like some secret government organization that knows all, collects all the alien stuff, like those they're controlling things, or at least on the end of alien things, that Carl Sagan could have possibly been a Majestic 12 member if he knew the total ultimate truth, or at least as much as they knew. Like as a secret for the government, the aliens have been here for thousands of years. They're the ones really in control. He was smart enough to know that if he was the one to come out and say that, one, he'd probably be dead or killed for it, and two, we couldn't handle it.
Yes, I'm fascinated by Carl Sagan. I must say, really intrigued by the role he played in those Apollo missions with the code words. Really intrigued with what he put into his one and only novel. I think we really are seeing what he knew and believed in that model. All the things he could not say as a scientist and still get his funding are in a story. And I think that's often the way things go. That truth we can't present or not allowed to present as fact, we present as story. And I think that was the great gift that Carl Sagan gave us in that movie. There's so much in it. I think it has to do with messages in our DNA. I think it has to do with the wow signal. And I think it probably has to do with some closer contact than that even.
Oh, yeah. I've read Contact I don't know how many times. I got obsessed with it in high school. I read that book like I don't know how many times before the movie even came out.
It's profound, isn't it? It really is a profound book.
And I mean, there's so much truth I think he probably knew. It's too bad we lost him so, in my opinion, early, that maybe he would have told or said, but like I said, one book he ever wrote, I think there's something in there. I've looked for it. I don't know what it is. Like you said, is it, what he knew, if he was trying to reveal it in that book? I don't know. It's a beautiful book, at least his vision of maybe how we would make contact. But I think he, like I said, was part of the Majestic 12. If anybody was, Carl Sagan might have been.
Very probably. My one gripe, I'll take this up with him if I see him, is that he did very inelegantly debunk and ridicule Eric von Daniken. And I think that was a shame, because Eric von Daniken was actually citing Carl Sagan. He was quoting Carl Sagan's writings from the 1960s. And because Carl Sagan had decided to chart a different course by the time Chariots of the Gods had got famous, he decided he'd best distance himself from his own work and rubbish Eric von Daniken at the same time. And I think to do that, knowing that for whatever mistakes Eric von Daniken may have made, he was essentially right, I'm a bit annoyed with Carl Sagan for that.
Yeah.
I don't think
but
that
I
was
think
a very
it's
nice
telling.
thing to do.
But I think it's telling, because I think that shows the point where he was given Pandora's box, given a peek of what was behind the curtain, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. And he knew he had to shut the Eric von Daniken thing down.
But I think that little bit of history tells us something, that very often somebody's public position and private position are not quite the same thing. And sometimes there's a dialogue behind closed doors that we don't know about. And when I spoke to Eric von Daniken last year, it was very interesting. His equanimity on things like that really impressed me. And he said that a lot of his data has come from people who will not support him publicly, but they'll give him the information privately. Right. And he says he's happy to respect that, because if he didn't, he wouldn't have had access to so much amazing information that has been entrusted to him. And he says it's very simple. Academia moves very slowly, and academics will lose their positions if they push the boat out too far. And so the new information has to come from outside, so then the academics can discuss it. And he says, my role is the outsider, bringing the thing onto the table. Then the academics can discuss it. And I was really happy to hear him say that, because I see myself in that same context. The Scars of Eden is slapping these things on the table, and the academics can now discuss it. But it's now out there for discussion, for people to look at, think about, and bit by bit, the academics can come to the table and have a party around it.
And have a reasonable argument to what you put forth. A lot of times they don't. They just brush the whole subject off at all, won't talk about it, and then it doesn't know justice. But we keep researching, keep trying to find these answers. You know what I always found fascinating is Neil Armstrong. We were talking about Buzz Aldrin, the moon missions. Neil Armstrong never came out and said there was aliens or anything like that, but we've talked about this on the show countless times because of my fascination with the moon and the moon landings and Neil Armstrong. You look at the press conference after the moon landings, go watch that. Tell me there's something off about the way these guys are.
It's sad.
But
it's
look
so
at
painful.
Neil Armstrong's life. He had a very, he struggled with, I believe probably struggled with alcoholism. He had, but he also had a fascination with ancient cultures. He spent a lot of his times just traveling the world and looking into ancient cultures. Why?
Yes, indeed. Al Warden as well, a fascination with Sumerian mythology after his moon mission. And NASA itself has a fascination with ancient cultures. Just look at how they name their missions, how they name their technology. And in a way, that's a way of directing our attention to some ancient stories if we want a context for what they're doing.
Yeah, I think that's what why Neil Armstrong, pursued those things. He never had a very public life after the moon landings. He kept very quiet, but he, if anybody could look at his life, they'd say, like, why did Neil do that? What was his interest? And he might have seen something that piqued that interest. Well, we're at the end of the show. Boy, it goes by quick. Thank you so much, Paul, for coming back on and talking about your newest book, Scars of Eden. When is it going to be released?
Scars of Eden should be available for pre-order at the end of this month, and it's going to be released the end of April. So from the end of this month, if you go to Amazon, Kindle, Barnes & Noble, you should be able to pre-order it. And then the big release, it'll fly off the shelves from the end of April.
Yeah, I can't wait to finish this book. I can't wait to get into your own personal experiences because I'm dealing with my own, so maybe we can connect on that. And I definitely want to talk to you, get your help on my own fictional story idea when you talk about the soldiers. And I want to hear a little bit about, I'm sure you have it in the book, but I want to talk to you about, like, what did they tell you? Because I'm trying to formulate this idea. And boy, it's weird how I was just thinking about this the last 2 days, and then I had not read your book yet, and then you're on this subject. It's weird.
That's a good synchronicity. And thanks so much, Jason, for having me on your show again. It's been a pleasure.
All right, guys, that's it for Paranormal Soup. We will be back next Sunday with guests. It'll be Valentine's Day, but, we're not doing a Valentine's show or anything like that. We got John Gastel to talk about Dungeon Party. We're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons and mythology and the paranormal and its connections to Dungeons and Dragons. So, this is a great show for people on Valentine's Day that don't have dates. Play lots of Dungeons and Dragons instead. This will be a good show for you on Valentine's Day. But we will be back. Same bad channel, same bad time. 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. Central, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. Pacific time. Thanks to everybody who is a patron. You do help pay the bills. You can find us on Patreon under Paranormal Soup or Jason Bland. Thank you to everyone who shares out the show. Keep doing that. That helps tell people about this. We get more people in here to discuss their own experiences. We'll start this movement, our own disclosure movement, that we are looking for the truth. We don't need it from the government. We will all together come together and find the truth. That's what we're searching for here on Paranormal Soup. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Paul. Everyone, have a great night. See you next Sunday.